All right. As the music dies out, I wish you a very, very warm welcome here at the Nieuwe Instituut. My name is Saskia van Stijn. In daily life, director of the Architecture Biennale of Rotterdam, but here as your moderator. Before I open up for the real welcome to Transition-Scapes, just to sort of get a feel for the room, architects, maybe raise your hand. Oh, interesting. 5. Energy experts. 4. Participatory experts. Money flow. Anything with money. Education. Students. Ah, great. Very, very warm welcome. We have a very richly dense program, which I'll tell a little bit about after our introduction. And I'll start with Mr. By now, Professor Martijn de Waal. I think we've known each other for 20 years now. When you were engaged in Mobile City, we were introduced by Linda Vlasseroot, the research lead of the Transition-Scapes. You're a journalist, media theoretician, and you're here to tell us a little bit about your lectorate. And joined here is a dear friend, writer, a brilliant cultural thinker and head of agency. So Martijn de Waal and Francine Westreden. Please join us here. Grab the mic.
Ja, wat doen we nu? What shall we do? Sit.
We blijven wel staan, het is dynamisch.
I stay, because I will only say something for 1 minute, I think. That's interesting, that students is a category on itself. I was wondering, what are you studying? Anything or nothing? Who? Spatial planning. Oh, okay. So that was the category that we left out, Saskia.
Yeah.
Spatial planners in the DOP. A warm welcome to all of you on behalf of the Nieuwe Instituut. My name is Francine van Westreden. I'm in real life, or daily life, not in real, in daily life, the head of agency at the Nieuwe Instituut. And that is the, let's say, the department that works most with international connections, I would say. Try to connect Netherlands-based designers with international context and questions. And all kinds of issues that are there internationally, but also nationally or locally. And I was lucky enough to be part of this whole endeavor. Linda Vlasseroot and Martijn asked me to be part of the steering committee. So I followed the whole process, let's say, closely. I'm really curious what you will present today. And I think, Christina, you said it is really nice when something gets wrapped up let's say at a certain moment. And I think it's a festive moment also today. So I hope we will celebrate it all. And well, looking forward. Thanks a lot. Martijn, to you.
Yeah, thank you. Today we're wrapping up. I will tell you a bit about how this all began. My name is Martijn de Waal, and I'm the professor of the Civic Interaction Design Research Group. That's a research group at the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. And this project actually goes a few years back when we and students from the Master Digital Design, we started collaborating with ARCAM, which is the Architecture Center in Amsterdam. And we started to explore the interactive design of city models. Because, and this was a question that's coming from ARCAM, they were saying, yeah, city models, of course, have always been the central aspect of architecture, right? That's where where a future becomes manifest, where a designer or an architect shows his vision of the future, and where you go from the abstract ideas to the material, where it becomes visible, tangible, etc. But, of course, they're also very limited, right? They show an ideal iteration, but they don't really show you the lived reality on the floor and around it. They show you just one version of the future, but not sort of all the alternatives that also could have been there. So we started exploring with the question was, can we maybe upgrade city models and make more visible than just the physical building, but also the future of how people will live there, how they will work together, how they will collaborate, because a building or a neighborhood or even part of a city is not just a physical infrastructure, it's also a social infrastructure, right? And the building sort of enables that or reacts to that. And can we do something with that interaction? So we started making these interactive models, and then we came to realize that that was actually a very good moment to start doing that, because we were seeing that the challenges in terms of urban development were getting more and more complex. Transitions like the energy transition, already from an infrastructural point of view, they're really complex with all these technologies that you go in the ground, on top of the ground, new buildings that you need in the city for the change of the energy, etc. But that's just the infrastructural level, right? And just actually this week we saw a new report also coming out from the WRR, which is the National Council in the Netherlands, advising the government, saying that, well, for all these challenges that are there, for all these transitions, we really need a strong social structure as well. Not just the physical infrastructure that we imagine, but also a strong social structure. So we don't need visualization of master plans, but we need tools that engage and that inform, that show us what's at stake, that initiate debate, and also serve as a tool to start building or strengthening the social structure. So that's where we moved from sort of interactive city models to this idea of transition-scapes, which is much broader, which is installations. We started calling them dramaturgies, enacted forms, where you visualize a future, but you don't just visualize it, you also organize a process of debate, interaction, etc. around it. Because it's not, we see it as the starting point for a conversation about that future, but also as a way to actually assemble a particular community in a neighborhood and have them start conversations with the local institutions. So that's what we're going to show you today. We're going to wrap that up. We're going to show what we've come up with. We're going to show you how you can do those visualizations, what it all takes, but also the different or new types of roles that you need to actually enable these transition-scapes. And that's, the title has gone now, but that's the title that was behind me just a second ago, which is really talking about intermediation. So the model itself is an object that allows intermediation between the plans, the structures, the people that have to deal with them, but also an intermediation in terms of starting a process of mutual learning, of collaboratively imagining our energy futures. So that's what we're going to do. How can we imagine our energy futures today? How could they be realized? We've did that for the past 2 years. And before we, somebody took my note from here. Oh. We cleaned it all up. Thank you. Because, and that's the last thing I will say, we didn't do this alone. This was a huge collaboration between a lot of project partners. You already saw Francine, you already met Saskia from IABR and the Nieuwe Instituut. But I want to say thank you to a number of them, and some of them will also appear on stage today. We couldn't have done this without the collaboration with, already mentioned, the Architectural Biennale and the Nieuwe Instituut, but also ARCAM, the Architecture Center in Amsterdam, UN Studio, Bright, One Architecture, Klever Franke, Tellart, Show, the City of Amsterdam, Alliander, Flux, Arcadis, Play the City, Huis van de Toekomst, Studio Bertels. And our research partners were also the Planbureau voor de Leefomgeving, which is the National Assessment Agency for the Environment, if I use the right correction, and a colleague research group at our university, the Spatial Urban Transformation Research Group. Thank you all. That was it for me, and I'll gladly hand back to Saskia.
Give it up for Martijn de Waal. Fabulous, and Martijn took it on himself to wrap up the afternoon, and that will be exactly at 5 o'clock. So at 5 we have drinks. Until that moment, we'll get a lot of presentations, thinkers, participants, academics. We aim to really unravel, and I am hoping for an active audience. So whenever you are bored or you want to pose a question, really feel free to raise your hand and I will rush towards you with the microphone. But we will, of course, start and kick off with a presentation of the outcomes of Transition-Scapes. Now, you might have noticed that we have a little bit of a struggle with technology, so I'm going to see if I push forwards. Oops, because I want to introduce Linda Vlasseroot and Christina Ampotsidou. Yes, fantastic. Who I know as head of program of the Architecture Film Festival of Rotterdam, but is actually a research by design, really rooted in the core of the project. I'm very much looking forward. We will share with Linda Vlasseroot, a cultural historian, former colleague of mine here at the Nieuwe Instituut, way back in the day when it was still called LAI. Curator, writer, and here as research lead of the Transition-Scapes. Please give it up for Cecilia and Linda.
Welcome, everyone. Let me just dive really into what Transition-Scapes is. It all started with kind of like the project set out to explore the question of like how interactive exhibition formats, and that can be models or visualizations, as Martijn explained, can support the energy transition as a shared and inclusive effort. Of course, we all know that energy transition is not just about like implementing like new technologies. It's also about like fundamentally rethinking the way we are living together and the way we are living in general, like our energy consumption patterns, our relationships with the environment and with each other. But of course, these kind of conversations, they tend to happen a lot like in boardrooms or in living rooms. And then the conversations that take place in institutions, on the part of the institutions, they tend to be overly technical or siloed or like risk averse. They're kind of like, yeah, it's a period of uncertainty, right, of how to deal with this. And on the other hand, we have the communities who have a lot of tacit knowledge. They have a lot of relationships that are at place, but they lack like visibility and influence. So we were interested to kind of like see what happens in between. How can we bridge the institutions with the civil society, and what is already happening in that space? This also like led us to to focus on one specific type of intermediary actor who acts already in that space, and what we call like the urban curator. So. Working together with House van de Toekomst, we identified what we call intermediation practices. And these are basically the daily actions that urban curators do in order to like help facilitate dialogue between the communities and the local institutions. And that can vary between, for example, like creating spaces for mutual learning where people can learn from each other and develop like new skills and capacities. It can be like agenda setting, so kind of like helping communities like surface their priorities and their needs and reformulating them in a way that becomes accessible and understood by institutions. But it can also be like forming coalitions with parties or actors that would normally like not really talk to each other. In that ongoing process, we try to find, like, to identify, like, tools who could support urban curators in this job. And we call these tools Transition-Scapes. And they are these kind of, like, interactive prototypes, or these interactive, like, visualizations or installations that we believe can have an influence on 3 different levels. They can help urban curators with institutional engagement, so they can help like translate their work in a language that institutions can understand. They can help with community building, and that is to kind of consolidate the resources and relationships and capacities that are already existing within the communities that they are working with. But they can also support them with like building organizational capacity themselves, so to provide like the time and the space to reflect and better define their own role and their kind of like institution, like their format, and also their kind of legitimacy. So before we kind of go into like, before I'm going to give the floor to Linda to say a bit more about the 2 cases, I think it's important to remember these 2 key terms that are at play at this at Transition-Scapes, and that's the role of the urban curator. that is a citizen professional, usually with a kind of background in a sort of creative discipline, who positions themselves inside the community and is driven by a desire for a common good. So he's putting his professional skills to work to organize and mobilize a public around a certain process. And the Transition-Scape as a kind of interactive tool that helps urban curators in this process of bridging and facilitating dialogue between the institutions and the communities.
Thank you, Christina. It was already mentioned, we did a research through design trajectory with, to the left, Huis van de Toekomst, House of the Future, which is a community-led initiative reframing energy as a social practice. It is located in Bospolder-Tussendijken, one of the poorest neighborhoods of the city of Rotterdam, that is already undergoing the energy transition as one of those first neighborhoods in Rotterdam. As institutions, mainly city government, is aiming to deal with these technical solutions, but also to deal with societal problems. However, Huis van de Toekomst takes it even one step further and is looking at human-powered energy, so really a more radical perspective on the use of energy. To the right, a map with the sustainability ambitions of Haven-Stad, one of basically the biggest urban development taking place currently in the Netherlands. It's Sloterdijk and Westerpark at the bottom, but it's actually going up north and crossing the Ij River. It is aiming for, say, 60,000, 70,000 new homes, 50,000 new jobs, aiming or a development taking place until 2050 or probably even 2055. So a very different type of project because Huis van de Toekomst is located in a closed courtyard building block with about 200 homes. Haven-Stad has a totally different scale, a totally different time frame, and also dealing with residents who are not there yet. So two different projects, two different contexts, however, one shared goal, at least for our research project, as we were looking for ways or to develop transition-scapes to make the energy transition more visible, more tangible, so that it could become part of a collaborative discussion, collaborative decision-making, but also collective imagination. We developed two prototypes for them. Dirk Bertels and Arthur van Schravendijk will explain them in detail in a minute. You will also be able to test them later today. So I'm only going to say a few things about them because on the left we developed a tool to facilitate dialogue between communities and institutions. What we did was actually to visualize a whole new type of value system relating to the resources of the community, talking about time, money, personal growth, and community power. Time and money is, of course, easy to grasp. The other two is much more delicate, but it made it visible within the communities itself because there are different types of initiatives taking place in Huis van de Toekomst. How to make this visible and also be part of a conversation inside the community, but also to the institutions, to make also visible to them what was going on within Huis van de Toekomst, and also, opening the black box as some institutions, namely the Housing Corporation, but also the city government would label it. To the right, we developed an app with augmented reality, related also to a map you can see here, but also to the model that is sitting in Arkham at this point, where we actually wanted to engage young adults, we have a caller, young adults in the age, say, between 18 and 26, who might be possible future residents, to make them aware of the energy use in Haven-Stad at that point. And then we actually are talking about the new normal. Of course, many neighborhoods need to undergo this energy transition, but when we talk about Haven-Stad, we already are using, say, energy that is much more locally produced, stored, and distributed. So we wanted to engage them more in how that is being done and also to engage them with possible future scenarios. While developing these transition-scapes, we also bumped into several design dilemmas. We discussed this extensively with a community of practice and with the many designers, so great that most of you are here. As also that was a research question to us, how can a transition-scape be, is it tailor-made or can it be more generalized so that we can also implement that in other places? I'm not going to explain them all in detail because you will get this booklet at the end of the session where you can all say it's a summary of what we have done. But you can imagine that, of course, questions like should it be much more general or should it be much more customized to the context that we are dealing with? Should we add personal stories or is it much more generalized? So actually, can it communicate with what type of audience at what moment in time? So in order to make that more visible, we said we wanted to put them in a list. Not to say that designers need to solve them as problems, but that you need to take this into account whenever you are developing a transition-scape for an energy transition or any other transition we think that is taking place. We also learned a few lessons. These lessons might look very familiar to you. That's also what we encountered because what we see is that when we are talking about these big developments, we are talking about issues that are already there for 10, 15 years. And that also tells us that it's very hard to solve, apparently. For instance, when we talk about the lesson number 1, shared visions are crucial to overcome uncertainty. What we noticed, also especially in regard to Haven-Stad, for instance, there is a framework, there are certain regulations about how to deal with this urban development, but a really shared vision of what that development might look like, how it should materialize, and where we actually are going as a collective is most of the time missing. And that means that uncertainty plays an important role, but also ownership, or say lack of ownership and lack of commitment is something that we have encountered many times. Number 2, 3, and 4 are a little bit very much in line with one another, because what we see is that within the local communities there's a lot of power, there's a lot of knowledge, there's a lot of strength in between. However, these community initiatives find it very hard to find institutional recognition. I'm almost there. So communication is essential, but challenging because we are still talking very much in silos. It's most of the time conditional. Discussions are also, institutional engagement is limited, and therefore we think it requires mediation, as we talked about with the urban curator. And the last point is much more reflection also on our role, as what we've noticed, for instance, in Bospol or Tussendijk, the amount of research is quite overwhelming. So when we arrived, what could we do as, well, being of added value? And what we really tried to do was to collaborate with a local partner that could indeed then lead to more visibility, legitimacy, but also give room to the partners to actually reflect on their own position and role. So, Christina presented you a model that is of course based on research we've done in practice. What we hope this afternoon that it could be also that we could have a discussion on how the model can go back to practice again, because what can we actually push in order to, for instance, what type of mechanisms could we install to support urban curators to strengthen their position, but how to install or initiate intermediation like an urban curator in neighborhoods where that is not taking place yet, for instance at Haven-Stad, how to facilitate such a process. And also we developed a transition-scape within a research project, but that research project is now over. How can then other parties pick this up and make this something that is useful, as we strongly believe it is, but how to put that into practice. So these are the key questions we hope we can touch upon today. That's it.
Give it up for Linda Vlasseroot. I'll let the questions hoover over you for a minute. These will be tackled in the 2 panels. There's a little break. The panels will be introduced with a lecture, and then we break it open, and that's where we have the conversation, but not without further, as was alluded on, introducing the presentation of the simulation model. Really on my toes here. Just returned from Osaka, where you were also contributing to the Dutch pavilion there. But here to introduce and demonstrate actually the simulation model are Dirk Bertels and Arthur van Schrijvendijk of Studio Bertels, both really entrenched, I would nearly say, as well, your educators and your, I would say, for years already engaged in this notion of what it is to design immersive spaces and interaction. So I hope to also impact that a little bit further, but the floor is yours.
Thank you so much.
Small applause, that gives good energy.
All right. So at the time, we were busy with a different energy transition, which was in the Middle East create a factory experience for Saudi Arabia to have them cure them of their addiction to oil. So it was this really fancy, unlimited budget project. But then we got into contact with the House of Toekomst and started partnering in this research project. And it was mind-blowing. It was, so if you had to grind your own coffee by cycling, the meetings were with your coat on because, you are the best heater of yourself. So it was an incredibly welcome change in our daily practice at the time.
I'm going to give you a mic because you are very...
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Don't worry.
So we've created two Transition-Scapes. Both are to stimulate the conversation between communities and institutions, but they're completely different in their approach, which we'll address during this presentation. So, but there was a first. There was a first idea after the first workshop. It was Transition-Scape Zero, the building itself, and I love that. I would love to share that for a minute. What if we used the complete building with all the ground floor apartments, empty them out, and create spaces for the community? Because Bospolder Tussendijk is one of the poorest neighborhoods of the Netherlands. A lot of children celebrations, children parties are not given because there's lack of space. A lot of studying is a problem in the homes because it's so crowded. So what if we would create a space with dedicated areas for use by the community? So there could be a celebration room, there could be a majlis, which is a common thing in the Arab world where you invite family. And what I liked about this approach mostly was that we say there's a lot of immigration, there's a lot of people with bicultural backgrounds. What if we see that as a power? What if we see the use of a majlis as a way to receive your family? And what if we see community homes where family can stay over because your own home is too small? But that's not what we started doing. We started doing the digital thing. So well, no, not only the digital thing. As you are participating in a community, you go through different stages. So the first thing is you sort of see there's something happening there. You want to know what it is, but you don't really know what it is. You look through the window. You don't really, you're sort of a bit scared in a way. But then you start using the facilities that a community might offer. You might have your bicycle tire repaired for free, or you might get bouillon block. Don't even know what that is in English. Not important. So you start using the facilities of the community. Then you start feeling inspired to sort of, I can contribute. I can fix bicycle tires. I can teach others to do so as well. Then you start creating your own initiatives. You start to use the skills that you have yourself, and eventually you become an orchestrator of the community as a whole. So we created 3 different kinds of installations. Well, at least in idea. Rui, you worked on the middle one. So what if you, as an introduction, could have like a bazaar, which is a physical manifestation of the community results. There's stuff you can take there, for blankets to isolate your CV installatie. The middle one is a physical installation. Once you start being part of this community, to see, okay, where could my initiative fit in this larger whole of the community? And it's a sort of a balancing system, like a mobile. So you could say, this is where my initiative would fit, and this is how it would balance and facilitate the community as a whole. And this thinking we took to the digital simulation model, which started like this. This was version 1 during the workshop. And it's a transactional system. It's a initiative will cost things and it will result in things. And 4 variables were used, like Linda just said, it's in Dutch, so it might be a bit hard to read, but it's vuur, uur, buur, huur, because we like the way it sounds, but it's fire, it's like the passion, the knowledge you need to do stuff. The hours, so certain initiatives may take an hour, like giving a lesson on the Dutch language, but it saves other people's time because they don't have to Duolingo all the time. Buur is the communal strength that an initiative will provide, and huur, rent, is money, is the amount of money things cost to run an initiative, but also the amount of money it saves. So that led us to visualizing, and that was quite hard. That was not the easiest part. So we had different styles. We came to this one, where we said there's a left part, which is also always the cost of an initiative, and the right-hand side is the benefits of an initiative. So if you look on the left-hand side, there's a taalcafé. It will cost knowledge and passion to do it. It will cost time to teach, and it will require some community connection. But it result in more people knowing the language. Therefore, the amount of yellow has grown. So it would sort of look like this interesting kind of map of the community as a whole. It's quite hard to read, but what's interesting about it is that the smaller initiatives are extremely needed for the larger ones to be possible. Yeah. So now we're going to have a live demo of this model, but it will be here as well. Zal ik je microfoon vasthouden?
Yeah, nice. Let's have some elevator music while I set up. Even kijken, volgens mij is die gewoon hier. Let's see. Voorzichtig dicht doen. Dat denk je fijn.
Jij staat nu dicht.
Ja, precies. Dan kan jij tenminste nog meepraten.
Doe het. Yes.
And now we need some extra magic so that the screen changes.
Daan.
Tommy, can we have a screen change to
Daan.
the laptop?
I think the magician is coming. There's a new cable coming.
Hoi. It's because we have extra high quality images, right? That's andere kant. So the challenges Linda showed just a minute ago were what we were facing here every day. Sort of this, how can you create a visualization system that is readable for people, which is extremely hard, and also a community, showing the community value is for institutions, it's important to see how many people are involved in this community. But if you have the train landscape, it doesn't say anything about the amount of people involved. So there's a notion of strength of the community, but there's no visualization of its amount or of its volume. And so we started adding numbers, sort of, this is with so many people involved, and it needs so many people to start an initiative, for so many people to be joining an initiative. Then we noticed that we're getting more and more numbers into the screen, and it did not solve any of its complexity. Nog meer issues?
Nee, hij doet het gewoon niet.
Nee?
Nou, weet je dat je de tijdsvak...
Oh, yeah. The other thing is when you have this roadmap, this train map of the community, it's just a snapshot in time. It does not say anything where we're coming from. It also does not say where we want to go. What is the ambition of this community? And what is the... because for institutions this is also important. Sort of, is this where we want to end, or is this something midway, where on a progress in progress? And we started with a system that was already visually quite demanding on the mind, but then having that also change in time was quite challenging. The lucky thing is that we can try these prototypes during the break, so you can just see them for yourselves.
Dirk, maybe in the meantime, we can have a conversation while they sort it out. The subtitle of this event is Navigating the In-Between. And could you speak a little bit about the correlation between the three scenarios that you introduced, from the bazaar to the digital? How do these worlds communicate?
Ah, yeah, that is funny, because they are interrelated. The one feeds the other if it's done best. Sort of the bazaar is a demonstration of what is available there, but in a way it's also the same can be shown in a different way in this balancing model. This balancing model is the direct reflection of the digital model, and if there's things changing in reality, of you're trying out these things in reality, you could have these reflected in the digital model, and the digital model can be tried to test out things to see if there's enough value of any of these four variables, if there's enough draagkracht.
Yeah, good one.
If there's enough resources available in the community to be able to facilitate a certain project. For instance, we've always used the Windows 95 course as a initiative that could start, but could never result in any result, because nobody would want to follow a Windows 95 course. So the three of them feed each other and inform each other.
Yeah. Well, this was an informative little window
Breakaway.
of opportunity that I grasped, but I think you're ready, right?
Yes.
Arthur, the floor is yours again.
Is it maybe possible to grab another mic?
Yeah, go for it.
Dan kunnen we samen discussiëren. Let's see. Hello. Yes. Awesome. Hello. My name is Arthur, and for the introduction, I just gave Dirk the floor. But now I'm also here to show you one of the prototypes we made for Huis van de Toekomst. As you can see, it's a bit different to the final design. So as Dirk was talking about, one of the challenges or conclusions we had on this model is that it doesn't cover the time factor. So when you start on something, it evolves, it grows. The smaller initiatives help build for bigger initiatives. And you actually want to save those steps. So that's what you see in this new design, where all these pages are steps into time. And here we can actually see the interaction on just one time step. And I hope the people in the back have brought their binoculars, but at least everyone in the front can see this. And later in the break, everyone can try it out themselves, of course. So as a start, we can see how much resources we have to grow our community, which is nothing. So if you want to start an initiative, we cannot really do anything. Unfortunately, you always need money or space or passion or something to build this community on.
And that has led to a lot of debate, because why does it not start with Huis van de Toekomst that will apply for a subsidy? So doesn't it always start with a initiative name, or with somebody who has the passion and the drive to start something? That's one of the
exactly. So now we're going to start by adding some funding to our community so that it can start to grow. But the funding is actually probably requested by Huis van de Toekomst. So it was a topic of discussion. Where are you going to start? But the entire model is a big topic of discussion, because we're quantifying something that cannot really be quantified, because it's human passion and human time, and it has nothing to do with these values that give and take from each other. It's mostly just your own initiative and your own willpower to keep this alive. So when we have one, and it's a bit, there we go. So now we have some funding, and as we can see, we have the possibility to create our first initiative in our community, which is of course Huis van de Toekomst. And this is a very special, it's a really confusing touchscreen, but we'll get there. Okay, stay. And now this one. No,
Aye.
that's okay. We'll just move it a bit. It's a bit iffy touchscreen, but we'll get there. So we'll grab this one, place it here.
Sort of saying that things need a... fuck. I'm sorry, Arthur. Things need a certain amount of resources to be able to start.
Wow. Yes. Come on. This one. And as you can see, the thing we would like most is just to have infinite House of the Future, House of the Toekomst, because they're a very special initiative. You just give them a little bit of funding, and they produce time, they produce more funding, they produce passion, which is, again, really resembles the amount of effort they are putting into this community to keep it alive. Which is, I think, very remarkable. And now that we have Huis van de Toekomst and we have a little bit of funding, we get the opportunity to build more different types of initiatives, like Soul Sand, one of the initiatives in Huis van de Toekomst that guides victims from the, wow, that's a difficult one to translate, toeslagenaffaire. Anyone?
Yeah.
The benefit scandal, yes, thank you, benefit scandal. And this one we can already see, it costs some time and money, but it produces also a lot of the time for the people that were participating, because it's a very complicated field to navigate and to solve this problem for yourself. So when we add this initiative, we immediately get a big surplus in time, because all these people can now save time by participating in this, and they can use that time into the community. But this is, again, an assumption that created a lot of debate, because we're just saying, well, if we save time so people are doing this, they immediately invest that time back into the community, which is, of course, not a given, but it's
the basis of the model. It's assumption of the model.
And that's also, I think, that this model isn't a ground truth. It more just resembles what could be, and the question is actually if we think that this could be. And during one of our many test sessions at Huis van de Toekomst, it was really interesting to see that for the participants from Huis van de Toekomst, some connections started to grow here that they weren't using yet, but were actually a possibility. For instance, the communal garden, we can try to add it.
And we need to go on as well.
Ah, okay. If you would add the, well, doesn't matter.
We'll show it in a different way in a minute.
Yes, exactly.
How do we, oh. Yes.
Aye. Okay. So you should be able to use this.
Misschien deze.
Yeah.
Hello?
The other
I'll
one's
just use this
maybe
one.
better. And the flat
Yeah, and the flat
pointer.
Are these working?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So that was a small intermezzo from the first prototype we made, Huis van de Toekomst. And then, as Linda already introduced, Haven-Stad is a project of a very different scale. It's much larger, and the challenge, while being a very similar topic, the energy transition, it faces many different type of challenges due to its scale. Yes. And in solving these challenges with this Transition-Scape, we wanted to make the future citizens of Haven-Stad part of this discussion on how to solve these challenges. And these future citizens are, as Linda already said, the students of today. Because in 25 years, they hope to have the first houses built. And I think 25 years will be enough time for these students to pay off their student loans and then finally get a house. So for this Transition-Scape, the goal was to gather their decisions on these challenges, but to also nudge them towards this more of a collective sense, because many urban developers, but also municipalities, see that generating energy more local and creating more local communities like Huis van de Toekomst can really help solve this problem of the energy transition, especially for a project of this scale. And to reach our audience, we had, of course, the HVA, the Amsterdam University of Applied Science, the lead research on this project, but also the Architect Center in Amsterdam, Arkham. And Arkham provided the ideal place. Arkham is a place that one of its key aspects is to facilitate discussions around urban development, both in the present as towards the future. And they have the scale model of the Haven-Stad project. But of course the HVA has a lot of students, and especially the amount of students create that we have a very diverse target audience, so also the possibility to attract many different opinions on the matter. We therefore developed an application, an augmented reality application that could be used on both locations. It could interact with the model, the scale model of Haven-Stad, but it could also be moved to different locations with the use of this map that we have here on the ground. And this provided us to also do some tests with students at the HVA, but also makes it possible for this Transition-Scape to be mobile, to be brought to public libraries, maybe even town halls in certain city districts, to really cover the entire city and make every city district a participant in this energy transition. And when the participants or the future citizens were partaking in this energy transition, there were two things that provided them with the information on this challenge. On the one hand, they had, of course, the AR application, which you can also test later over here, that showed them different facts, different effects also on their living space, created by the certain choices that you could make. But we also had a number of posters surrounding them, providing extra contextual information. So when 2 or more people were participating on this application, so per iPad, they were discussing on the certain facts, on certain topics, on the certain challenges. And if they needed more information while they were in their discussion, they could use these posters surrounding them to get that extra contextual information. And it was mostly because it's much harder to have a mediator on this topic because of the scale of it. With Huis van de Toekomst, we had, of course, the people from Huis van de Toekomst that can help with using this model when interacting with it, with answering questions. But for this, we're working on a very different scale. And I think you...
Yeah, these posters, they provide context. And because we noticed with the first prototype that it was a bit sort of, these are the choices in the energy transition. This is all true, but it lacked urgency and it lacked flavor in a way. So we went to the HVA and asked a lot of students, what kind of flavor, what kind of motivation does this need? Do we need to invite you to become part of a student council or youth council to provide your opinion and to think along with the energy future? Or does this tone of voice needs to be much more radical and activist, saying sort of, if you don't think now, the boomers will decide for you. And the third one was, you are already part of a lot of collectives, but let's embrace love and start living more in cooperatives and organize energy in a cooperative way as well. And the outcome was that the students of today want to be heard, but they also value that their opinion is used, that it lands somewhere and somebody's taking that into account. So that's why these are like this, each with a dilemma, sort of how do you organize your energy? Will you be autarkies? Will you be on your own? But probably in the cold in the winter, or will you be completely comfortable, but you have to be discussing with your neighbors all the time of what temperature the thermostat's going to be.
Yeah, so that's the contextual information. And then I'm going to briefly go over the steps inside the AR application, and I will, of course, invite you after the presentation to experience it yourself. In the application, we chose to present these dilemmas on 3 levels. The first one is, or three perspectives. The first one is their own living space, the top one, the apartment. So how is your house going to change if you choose for a certain direction on facilitating your energy? The other one is the street level. So how is your direct environment going to change based on the choices you make? And then the last one is the entire city district or even national. So what are the changes on a much larger scale that will happen? For example, on the national scale, there's a choice between putting even more windmills inside the ocean, like far out, or we could take nuclear energy. And it's, of course, both are a very big topic of discussion, but it's a choice that needs to be made. On a street level, we can produce much more locally, but it will mean that you will have more solar panels, more windmills in your direct view, maybe even less space on the street because we need to move more facilities directly into your living space. And for this example, we're going to go over the apartment level. So when the participant, the future citizen, chooses one of the levels, they are zoomed in into this level to really get a three-dimensional view of this perspective. And then they're presented with three choices. For each of these perspectives, we have three choices. And in this case, they can choose to be entirely energy independent, self-sufficient. You're just going to produce it yourself. You're going to store it yourself. And the other option is to become a collective. So as an apartment block, you can become a collective on generating and storing your electricity. Or the third option is just do it as we are currently doing it. We have market parties, they will facilitate it. And it will cost a bit more money, but it's easier for you. And if we choose one of these levels, we can see all the facts about this. So if we choose for self-sufficient, which sounds really cool, and energy independent, but it means you will have one floor less inside your apartment because we have to place a giant battery inside. And you can also not play your PlayStation during the winter months because we need this extra electricity to keep your house warm. You can give it a thumbs up or thumbs down. So if you don't mind that you have less space, well, less space, I don't care, but I like to have a battery. And I don't care that I can't play my PlayStation in the wintertime. I'll just read a book. And based on how you grade these facts, you can come to a choice. And you do this with a group. So there's 2 or 3 people behind the iPad. They will discuss on these facts, give it thumbs up or thumbs down. And then finally, they will make a decision in this perspective on how they think the energy should be stored or generated. And the reason we chose for this AR scene is because augmented reality has a really intuitive way to interact with three-dimensional space. It's very difficult to comprehend how these changes affect your living space. And the idea of this AR visualization was that you can really walk around it, zoom in and zoom out, to really understand the changes in your house and in your living space that will become in effect. And then after you've made all these choices, you are presented with the choices of others. And this was one of the things that came from the test we did with the panel. And this was mostly because if we want to create energy collectives, we need most people there. So we wanted to ask the participants the question, well, now you've answered all of these things. You were maybe doubting between energy independent and being a collective. You chose energy independent, but we need everyone in collective to become a collective. Now that you see that a lot of people voted for collective, would you switch your choice? But I think the most interesting result we got was that most participants chose for the market parties. Even though we tried to nudge them toward collectivity, we gave information on collectivity, they liked this idea.
It's easy.
It's easy, yeah. It's
and there's experts doing it, so I can relate to all of them.
So that resumes the second Transition-Scape. And again, invite you to try them out yourselves. And then as the final one, in both of these, they're really topics or tools for discussion. And these posters are part of the Transition-Scape. So we wanted to end with this definition that a Transition-Scape is not just the digital tool, but it's the space to spark this conversation and really to connect people around this topic and the technology as a supportive tool for this discussion.
Yeah, so there's no Transition-Scape without the urban curators, as you mentioned before.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe two very short questions. I'm very sorry, I'm struggling with the flu and I'm trying to be as brave as I can, but here you have it. I'm snottering away. Apologies, in other words. I was wondering about two aspects. Maybe notions of, you talk a lot about the future, and I was wondering this idea of how do future and models operate in a time where futures and models are scrutinized, or it's not a trick question. I'm really curious, like how do you deal with this notion of uncertainty?
Yeah, and especially in this sort of in this augmented reality model, where you are showing a living room. So you're putting in a couch, but yeah, you don't know about the couch. You don't know about the size of houses. You don't know if people will be living together. Or you don't know. So you just present an image of today, knowing that the world will change. So in this specific case, we made it relatable to the people today by making it resemble what they know of today, but without sort of complexing the matter of different woonsamenstellingen, sort of
Living arrangements.
Living arrangements.
Yeah. And the other question is actually related to your point that you made, that people actually are inclined to lean into the municipality and or market parties.
Yeah.
What would your advice be to those parties? Like how do you envision them picking that up?
To pick up like to the market parties in municipalities.
Yeah, it's like how could we then re-envision your path, the paths and the questions in terms of, you know, the singular temporality, the amount of resources and so on. Like how should they embrace the fact that
they're going to be responsible?
Well, it seems that way. At least that's what the democratic model actually points at.
Yeah, I think it's inevitable that we still need to create these local initiatives, local collectives, but then do it from a market, like from a municipality perspective, so they can, if they facilitate this collectiveness, it might still feel that the collective isn't the responsible one, so you can sort of create these shadow collectives. So have the municipality be the responsible figure, but still create like the discussions for the local parties. Because I think even today you see more people being part of a collective without them knowing it, which was also part of our first questionnaire in the application, that being part of a vereniging, association, it's also being part of a collective and making collective decisions. And there's a lot of neighborhoods that organize like these street food experiences where they all dine together and everything, which is all this collective effort, which is something they might not yet realize. And
so
I
we
think
need to rebrand collectivity, is what you're saying.
Maybe rebrand.
I like shadow collectivity.
The shadow collectives.
We'll get back to that in the second part of the conversation, but please give it up one more time for Dirk Bertels and Arthur van Stravendijk. Thank you. All right, well, I don't know if we have to disentangle all of technology or that you are totally self-sufficient, Paulus Achterberg. I would say household name for everybody who has been reading into energy transition, surplus values on the net, collectivity, like a very broad range of expertise when thinking about the future of energy consumption. So I'm very honored to listen to the short lecture and provocation, I think, knowing you a little bit. Officer, I love the title, Change Officer. Change Challenge Officer. Okay, that word dropped off of Alejandro. Please give it up for Paulus Achterberg.
Yeah, thank you. I love to be here, and I loved the overview of what's been happening in Transition-Scapes, because in the past, well, it can be rather challenging, and in the past I've been very angry about the complete lack of methodology in the energy transition in the neighborhoods. I will elaborate on what's happening in Transition-Scapes and give some next steps in how I look at it and what can be done. But first, I just need to come back what's happening in terms of energy transition. And I've always said energy transition is not about putting off the coal-fired plants and putting on the wind parks at sea. It's a change of built environment. It's a change of mobility. It's a change of industry. Industry policies need to be made in order to make the change. And if you don't, like for instance at industry, we see if you don't, it's going to collapse and nothing works. And the same accounts for built environment. I want to focus on that one today. If you don't see the change, well, nothing is happening. And that's exactly where we are right now. Nothing is happening. So what's happening in energy? But if you look at the production part of it, of course, we know there's a lot of offshore wind added to the whole. Solar panels are a part of it. And we are shutting down the coal-fired plants. And even if some people think about nuclear, until now we had about 3% of the total was nuclear, and all the elaboration plans for in 15, 20 years, it's still going to be 3%, because everything that was on gas, on oil, on petrol becomes electric. So the electricity system is going to be the number one, and it's going to be solar and wind. And if not for the full 100, then maybe for 97%, I don't care. So it's almost solar and wind. And if you understand that, then the basic point is the solar energy is cheapest, by far cheapest. It's in the Netherlands around 5% production cost, and it maybe will be 4% or 3%, which is very good. There's only one problem. The sun shines during the day and not during the night, and more in summer than in winter. So we need, if you look at the energy, you need a second system, a buffering system. The ones that brings you from day to night and from summer to winter. And wind and solar can be a nice combination, but still you need a buffering system. And this buffering system could be done like in large batteries somewhere far away from all cities and industries, which means a lot of network to be built. And we already see in the Netherlands 200 billion on extra investments in the networks. And these investments are because we still use the whole energy system as it were coal-fired plants or gas-fired plants. So instead of using the solar there, putting the solar there where you use the energy, and creating a buffering system locally, because buffering, what is buffering? It's not just batteries. Now, batteries is the last choice of buffering. The first choice is adjust your moment of use. And the second choice is, for instance, when do you charge your car? If you do that at evening, it's the less advantage moment in time. During the day is the best moment in time, because then the sun shines. And so, just adjusting the time, a lot of options are there to adjust the usage to the time, and heat buffering is number two, because heat, especially seasonal heat, the heat in the winter is the most expensive way of most expensive mean of energy. So the more heat storage you can do. And now if I look at it, change of time usage, use of time, heat buffering, it's all very local. It can be completely integrated in the built environment in the areas we're talking about. So, and if you know that, this is the future of energy. It cannot be denied. It is the way you do it. There are a lot of options, but solar and wind and buffering, and the more you do that, where you use the energy, the cheaper the whole system becomes. That's the basic idea. Now, what's happening furthermore? New areas to be built, like Haven-Stad. this week only in the newspapers, several projects, large projects of new residential areas stopped because of net congestion. So what's really happening is that because we are trying to solve the energy transition in the way that Edison thought of it in 1870, instead of using the new technology, we see that everything stops. So the centralized way of doing things takes a lot of time, tens of years. So it's possible, but you need to wait tens of years before you can build further, before you can make this industrial transition. So if we need to do that differently. New residential areas, I've told, it's so easy to solve that I don't want to talk about it. So that's true. It's so easy. So we step to the next one. Existing built environment, which is the real issue. And this is where the transition-scape comes in, because if you want to change the energy in the built environment, of course we want to be fossil-free, but also the gas is becoming more expensive. You see the geopolitical issues coming up. So the moment you can insulate buildings, use locally produced energy, and adjust the moment of use to the existing energy, that would be much cheaper and much more future-proof. So how do we get there? And what's the big issue in this? The big issue is that in the Netherlands we have like half of the buildings are part of social housing companies. The other half is privately owned, and we have millions of owners with all their own perspectives. We have municipalities with all their own policies. We have grid operators and all kind of players. And now, who's going to make the decision? So if a Ministry of Economic Affairs would say, I think we need to do this, there will be resistance. So the Ministry of Economic Affairs won't say that, never. Ministry of Internal Affairs, no, they don't want to talk about that because it's a political issue. So they put it to the municipalities. The municipalities need to say what to do. And the moment some municipality says to a neighborhood, we have thought about it and you are going to get A, B, or C, doesn't matter what it says, there's always resistance. Because if you look at this interaction between institutions and local households and all these owners, they need to decide also in the same process, so that they are together in the decision process. And if one of them says, I have thought about it, and you need to invest 20,000 euros in your house, it's always resistance. No matter what if it's district heating or whether it's a windmill or whatever it is, doesn't matter. So we need to have a different type of process to run through. And I think there's the key to what needs to be done. And the Transition-Scapes described the methodology that needs to be in place in order to create this collective decision-making process. But so there are all elements, and these elements are open. So there are elements in terms of how to set the agenda or how to create an interaction in certain ways. But if you know that's all there, it's just like building blocks without a path. So we need to create a path in that. And this path I call the steps in the process to make a decision. And the way I look at it, for the built environment, we need to do 10,000 of these projects. So just imagine 10,000 projects. So that means that not every project is somebody says, okay, what are we going to do, and then make a project plan, and so it needs to be standardized. It needs to be in a way that everybody knows, okay, it's our project now, and in 6 to 12 months, this project is over, and we have made a decision. So that would be the basic assumption of this type of process. So, and in order to do so, it cannot be that somebody says, I've made the calculations, I made the simulation, I've thought about it, and this is going to be the answer. So the only thing you can do this is by bringing together the people that are involved in defining what they want. So what I call the requirements for the market players to make an offer. Not just the market players, maybe also the grid operator or the municipality. So what are the type of requirements? What functions are we talking about? Suppose you have a neighborhood. Not possible with Tussendijk because everybody in the Netherlands has been there already. A different type of neighborhood. I say, okay, what's possible in this neighborhood? And I think it starts with what was already in the presentations earlier, that municipality and grid operator, maybe also the social housing company, need to be clear what's possible or not. So I was with the social housing company recently in one of these complex neighborhoods, and I found out they don't have money at all for any type of installation. So if we would come with plans for installation, they wouldn't be able to deliver. So we need to have something within the limitations of what a social housing company can do. What are the options for the grid operator? Maybe it takes 10 years or 20 years for expansion. So what's there right now? What is the capacity on the grid that's there? Or what are the requirements from the municipality in terms of the public space and how to be used, or some water issues or some other issues? So if we can pull that together in step one, the basic requirements from the institutions, that's what I call space for the process. So you create space by giving the limitations. If you don't give the limitations, it will be an open discussion. And if you feel like 10,000 of these projects and we start like every project will take 5 to 10 years, it's impossible. So it needs to be quick, it needs to be clear. So institutions can say, this is what I can do and this is what I cannot do as step number 0, and it creates a lot of space. So from that on, what kind of function? And I already mentioned the water, the green, but especially, of course, in terms of energy, what kind of heating, charging, maybe some other things. And you can, so if, for instance, charging, you can, there are different options. So there's no charging, or there's a charging area, and in this charging area we create a battery, and for this battery we create other type of solutions. So this is, but then you need to walk to the charging area. So it's a public space part, and there's an energy part of that. So the first step in this, with this neighborhood, with this well, inhabitants, could be the house owners, could be the inhabitants. You define the criteria, what's important, price, green, etc., and the functions, charging, heating, other things. And by doing so, you can ask for what would be the consequence, like in the simulation, what would be the consequence if we do so? And then a final ask for offerings from the market parties, and then you make the decision. That would be a quick design of the path that you can go through, and it would be made very easy. And if you do that, then in terms of it's going to be a collective, but not a collective in the way that you produce your own assets. You define your own solar field or whatever. No, you just ask for market players to offer. So the energy community is not the provider of the solution, but the one that makes, well, decides which kind of offering you choose. So I make it, if you make this next step, it's especially a next step of what happened to Haven-Stad, because you need to find a way for this collective options, and in the same time, these residents, they want to have something like market players that can solve this. So here's the next step to that. And I'm talking about this process, and if you look, yes, I sorry. And sorry, I was too fast. And if you look at this process, where it could be 5 to 10 steps, then somebody independent needs to guide all these stakeholders through this process. And this is where the urban curator came along as a perfect embodiment of that type of role. Social work has been this type of role. I'm involved in a report from the Nationaal Klimaatplatform that will also make attention to this social work type of solution for guiding the stakeholders through the process. But it needs to have this type of fast results in terms of 6 to 12 months. It needs to be standardized, it needs to be easy, and by doing so, offerings can be made by market players, financial constructions can be delivered, and regulations can be changed in order to make this more simple. So this would be my idea of the next steps. Is this very complex compared to what we're doing right now? Well, there are some differences, but it's not that different, because in a way, the difference is that you create a local balanced energy system, but it's a process that comes close to just selecting an offering from the market players. And if you do so, I think we can have a solution for the built environment, both the existing built environment and the new residential areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Palas. Please have a seat so we can unpack your thought-provoking illustrations on both where the institution could go, where the municipality could go, where the market could go, where the citizens could go. Two people actually doing that work, maybe from the Citizens Commons, will join us for the conversation. Melle Smets is an artist that I have been following. Please join us while I introduce you. An artist that has, I would say, one of the most systemic minds and then questions those systems. But he is here actually as founder, co-founder and photographer of Huis van de Toekomst. Have a seat. Did you get an applause yet? No?
And I didn't do anything yet.
It's to make you feel welcome. Some of you might have read Petra Hofman in the announcement. Unfortunately, she also fell ill. But luckily, we have Hanna Kruger here to replace her. So we really already get a huge applause for being so flexible. But you are from deep.
Thank you.
Melle, maybe just sort of, what is your relationship to energy?
Wow. Well, it's very personal, I must say. I think the moment I started to think about energy as a big system crash, what's coming towards us, I was one of those people who was just never thinking about it. It was just there. And then you start to realize, but you know, if we want to keep up all this infrastructure and all this traveling and all this food and all this, everybody can see, or you don't even have to think that's going, that's gonna crash anyway. So that I realized, and then I started to think, but what if you turn around the question, like how much energy do you actually need as a person? Where's my really bottom line? Where does my body start to fail? And from there, my thinking started with the project we called the Human Power Plant. And then we thought, okay, what if we just start unravel, let's say, the very complexity of the energy system and just start over by scratch by, what do I need? And then from there, build up a narrative of yeah, how much is it, and can I find it within myself, and how much do I need from my environment, and then from there, yeah, you find out we can do with a lot less. But it definitely opened my eyes of how wasteful we are with basically all the systems we have in place, which are every time you have a transition from, I don't know, you fill in a form somewhere, instead of getting your eggs, you first have to fill in a form to get the eggs. Then basically you're already wasting a lot of energy just to get your eggs. And for this we do with everything. So everything is a very long supply chain, and that supply chain takes a lot. And so from there I really thought, wow, this can be more simple. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, definitely. It's a very elaborate, beautiful answer, actually, to think about what are the basic needs of what we need. And maybe then, could you take us by the hand how that led to you co-founding, together with Klaas Burger, the Huis van de Toekomst? So maybe also elaborate a little bit on the drawing behind you.
Yeah. This is actually the house of the future. In the future, it's not like that now, unfortunately. So this is the JJP outblock. This is one of the, well, you could say system failures in social housing, because this had to be renovated 20 years ago, because then it was already really not livable anymore. Now it's still not livable, but because of disagreements on a high level, it was never really, there was never taken a decision, so it kept on going, so people were just basically in a very bad building. So the moment I was asked because we were asked to come to the neighborhood, because the human power plant is going to, let's say, more the crucial parts of our energy system, and then let's say the neighborhood was not on our bucket list, but we were asked to come to this neighborhood because this is a neighborhood who was in transition, who get a heat net. And because of the heat net, it's basically one of these transition moments, which is an exciting moment in terms of, okay, we're gonna try it. And the guinea pig became this neighborhood. And the reason that this neighborhood was chosen among 5 other neighborhoods was because it's 90% is social housing. So basically, if you have one, the company signs the contract, then, well, basically you can start. In theory, and then in practice it didn't happen like that. And we came in at the moment that it basically got really a sloppy process, because Haven-Stad, who is the social housing company, had to sort of get the agreement of all the attendants that they could actually change the system in their houses. So they have to sort of approve that everybody's willing to go along. And this became a very difficult process, because people will not open the door. Sometimes different people were living in the house while on the registered there were different names. So a lot of social issues from this neighborhood started to pop up, and that was actually not a technical issue. It was a huge social issue. Like, there's basically a different reality than what we see on paper. So from there, it became a challenge. How do we get enough people to sign in order to go along with the transition? And at that moment, we stepped in, and this was one of the buildings which was in a total, let's say, people were so much. There was so much light to them over the years that they would get a better house, they would renovate it, and it never happened. So basically, this was one of the worst places where people lost basically their trust. Yeah. So that's how we started. Yeah. And then from that moment we said, okay, how do you start up the conversation about energy while everybody is really, and then we thought we just open up the House of the Future, which is basically a social club, or give it a name, where people just can enter. And we just started the conversation about what is energy for you. What kind of energy do you have? What are you lacking? How do you use energy? What kind of energy you want in the future? And then it became much more the stories people start to tell is much more about heritage, about culture, about traditions. And for example, you know, if you welcome somebody to your house, you want it to be warm there. You know, it's an insult if it's freezing cold. Well, House of the Future didn't have any heating, so it was freezing cold. But we started to learn a lot about, if you talk about, you know, what is actually the need of a community, and then you translate it to an energy supply or an energy demand, then you come to different narratives. And then words like circularity and all these abstract words become very practical about what you can do.
Yeah. Thanks for that first introduction. Maybe you would want to introduce yourself and maybe take into consideration what DEEP as a foundation is actually doing.
Yeah, I will.
It's on.
Is it?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. It doesn't sound like it's on. Great.
Your voice is just not...
Yeah. Yeah, so like you said, I'm replacing Petra Hofman, who is one of the co-founders of DEEP, which is a transition bureau. And we work mostly with municipalities on projects such as a heat network in a neighborhood that you just described. So the issues that you described are very relatable to us. And it's those exact issues that we try to mitigate with our work. And we try to do so in a very stress-sensitive, local, and with an awareness about existing cultures to make sure that those problems of a municipality wall singing be like, a heat network is coming, yay! And everyone's like, first of all, what is a heat network? Second of all, who are you? Questions like that. That's what we try to do in our work. I did my master's research on gender and energy poverty, so that's my background, and it's basically I did a research like a whole process on how we can make municipal interventions such as those more energy just, so making the process more energy just and making sure all voices that you want to hear are being heard, which is difficult. But yeah, that's basically what we're trying to do at DEEP.
I'm not trying to trick you, but gender and energy?
Yeah.
I never made that correlation.
Mm-hmm.
How can I understand those two?
We could talk for hours, and it's more like intersectional than that as well. But
Okay.
because it was a master's program, I focused on gender, because in energy poverty, there's a big gendered aspect. So 1/5 of the energy poor households in the Netherlands are led by single women. More physiologically, women tend to be more colder and warmer. Women usually live longer, a bit longer than men, get left with little pension on their own. So there's things like that relate to gender.
Yeah.
Obviously, that it's also related to being non-Dutch, not speaking the language. There's multiple facets, but the gender one is really prevalent. My thinking started with that 1/5 of single women who are struggling with energy poverty.
Yeah, great. No, thanks. And since you mentioned intersection, actually, Bospolder-Tussendijk is also a very diverse, in the classical sense, ethnic neighborhood with 74 different nationalities roaming together. So the conversation will be until 3:45 for those of you who are getting restless. I know it's a wooden auditorium, but we'll dive straight in, and I aim to unpack a little bit this notion of the urban curator, and I'm trying to get it as practical as we can. So really get from the theory to what does this person need, what are the governance systems, what are the skills, maybe just to kick off, do you consider what the work at DEEP is doing, is that an urban curator?
I guess so. And maybe we can expand that further, but we work usually with municipalities and then in the neighborhoods. So if you look at it practically like that, we're in between those people. And we try to, because we know we're also outsiders, sometimes we work in places where we live, more often we don't. We are located in Apeldoorn, we're doing a project in Den Haag, for example. That's not close. Mm-hmm. So we try to find organizations within the neighborhood, kind of like that we were mapping in the model, to help us. So we're doing a VVE aanpak. So what's VVE in English? Like a homeowners associations. Thank you.
Agenda for all these words.
Yeah, really good.
Thanks.
And we work with a single fathers group in the neighborhood to try to explain, to work with them, like this is what we're doing, this is what the municipality wants. Obviously, you know more about your neighborhood than the municipality. That's where you get a nice connection, because that always gets a laugh, because it's true. And those are kind of small interventions that we try to implement to as best as we can, be maybe a curator, yes, in local neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my requirement for a curator is that we need to come to standardized processes, because there are at least 10,000 projects to be done. And the examples of Bosbel de Tussendijk or some other neighborhoods with more than 100 nationalities, complex issues, need a lot more time than the 6 to 12 months that I described. So I think that there is some issue in the Netherlands where we have neglecting some of their neighborhoods, especially in the larger cities. And this neglected neighborhood shouldn't be the mold for how to organize energy transition everywhere.
Yeah.
So we need to make clear that these are two different type of issues. And I think that we can learn a lot from what you've been doing in the last years, in order to make a standardized process for really making the choices in the neighborhoods. And I think the urban curator term should be used for that. And the other part, the more regenerating processes that needs to be done in all these neglected neighborhoods, should have different name, because it is about neglect, and it is about people. You call it house of the future. Well, it's for people that don't see a future with everything that's coming towards them. So it's about restoring the future or something like that.
Yeah, it's fun. It's interesting you mentioned that, because while I was preparing for this, I was thinking about the last, say, 30 years and how government has withdrawn to a certain extent. So this idea of neglect is both in terms of neglecting in a physical sense, the houses that need refurbishment. You mentioned 20 years for the EEP outblock, nothing was done. It's not to badmouth anybody, but just to get it really, straight, that it has a material component, both how we produce energy, but also how we repair maybe these neighborhoods from a physical sense. And then there's a very large aspect that has to do with the social aspect.
So in my opinion, it's all about social aspects.
Okay.
Because this whole idea, and this is also a gender issue, if we talk about energy transition in the neighborhoods, all of you start with talking about the technology, and I was already telling the best way to screw up your project is to be starting with the technology by saying that you thought about it, and it's going to be district heating. So, and then you have all the resistance organized. So, but if you look at differently, there are all kinds of assets you can produce in the neighborhood. So the technology isn't the issue. What is the issue? What will it cost on a monthly basis if you live there? So that's a very important part. And how to make the joint decision, also about joint investments that need to be taken. So that's the social part of it. And there's the collective decision making, which makes it so difficult. So it is a social process in 100% of the cases.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Melle, maybe just railing back also to this question, like what does it take actually to be a sort of intermediate? Because you're also not homegrown. You were, in fact, I did not know that. I thought it was self-initiated that you were there, but you were invited. And there, no moral judgment there whatsoever, but more like what do you do differently that you do enter into the urban fabric, and that you gain the trust and the trust that you referred to earlier yourself, so that you get into conversation. That's the first thing you need.
Yeah, well, yeah, let's say I come from an artistic tradition, which is really art in public space. So I first ask myself, where is public space? Who is public space? So I always look at the physical situation and how people use it. And that's where I always start. So I always just start observing, listening, looking. And then from there, you start to figure out, okay, what's at stake here? You know, what is lacking, or what is the biggest fear that will hit everybody? Or so there's always something which you can maybe not see on the surface, but which is there. So in this neighborhood, for sure, that energy transition is one of these examples. Like something is coming, but nobody knows what it actually is and what will be the impact. And at the same time, a lot of, especially in this neighborhood, nobody has the idea that there can be a sense of ownership on your own environment. People all feel like, well, this is not ours. Basically, we are neglected as well as the buildings are. We are. So there's a very, in that sense, the self-awareness of you can actually, take ownership is something that's not so apparent. Yeah. And basically, those things I always try to do. That first, create the awareness for whatever subject it is, and then also show, and I do this, of course, in an artistic way. I draw a future which is completely human-powered, which is ridiculous. Even thinking if you're coming from somewhere in the world to get away from the human-powered society, and then you don't want to end up in the next one. It's provocative, but at the same time, it's something everybody can own. Everybody understands that narrative, and then you have a conversation, and then you have a starting point. And from there, and I think if you talk about what do you need as an intermediate role, is that you can actually create perspective, which is real, which I can't do now. We are basically running this housing block temporary because people are thrown out, and for a temporary time we can use it. But that's not a real perspective. That's just the in-between role. And if you want to play a role in a righteous way, and that people really get involved, then you also have to be close to that perspective. So as you sketch, if this is actually real, you can do the process and then it will happen, then that will be wonderful, because then you really have something to work towards to. And now we are just basically seducing people, pushing around, being the, let's say, the bad boy in the classroom. But everybody also senses that this is temporary.
So that's why I stressed the short period of time that needs to be taken, and also about decision making, because then you see that what you are contributing really leads to something, and if not, it's just talk.
Yeah, so it seems that we need to start weaving the urban curators should start weaving different temporalities. But I was wondering, Hanna, if you could respond to the outcome of Studio Bertel's projection, where I'm sort of trying to understand this. On the one hand, we all talk about participatory trajectories and often very intrinsically motivated people that work in that field, versus the outcome where people want the municipality or the market to take care of, my words, the issue. How do you read those two realities?
Yeah, I recognize that the end result. Couple of things you said. We have to explain to people that they have ownership over their neighborhoods. That's a new idea. It's new for them, but it's also still new for everyone, right? It's a really normal idea that the buildings are there, the park is there, and the municipality maintains it, and it's not mine. So cooperative ideas in neighborhoods are still quite new, especially in neglected neighborhoods. So giving them the option through a model like that, it's not really that weird that the end result is something that they're used to already. And I've seen this in heat projects in the north of in North Holland. One of the municipalities I worked with tried to do it a different way and start with a not vulnerable neighborhood. They picked one that was really well insulated, in the sense that, they can start right away. And what happened there is we went into the neighborhood, talked about going off the gas grid and our future. And the energy transition team of the municipality is obviously very informed about that. And the people weren't. They were like, we're going off the gas grid. All right. Well, nice that you tell us. It's really that brings me a lot of perspective about what I need to do to my house, because I got a new CV unit a couple of years ago. So then when that's old enough, I'll have to do something gasless, and they were so fine with it. Also because there weren't many other issues going on in that neighborhood. But they were okay with going through a process like you described. Like, these are the technical options. In that neighborhood, for example, it was too small for a heat network. So we're going to have to do heat pumps. That was basically the only solution. And they were like, okay.
Yeah.
So
but that seems like, because I'm sort of still struggling, like you mentioned the imaginary, but there's maybe also sort of an emancipatory force of all parties involved. And maybe, Paula's looking at you, and if I may ask you through the lens of the marketplace, let's say, do you feel that these models of co-ownership, is the market so versatile that they would move around when we offer maybe different temporalities, different models of ownership, how do you see that future pan out?
So I was discussing about this energy community as the one that gives the assignments. So they choose the offerings. And in terms of different timescapes, if you look at it from that perspective, you could start with, for instance, charging, and then this, so in 10 years from now, we will have batteries or things like that, maybe heat pumps combined with heat storage, in order to make it cheaper. Then the municipality needs to do something in order to make this heat storage possible in the public space. These are the type of combinations that I see. And in order to, so it's very important to create this energy community, not as the one that buys all the assets and put them in place with a screwdriver in their hands, but just make the decision on the best offering. And in an offering, it starts with a price. So what's the price per month? So in an example of Haven-Stad, so the students, they just didn't know about the price. They were talking about the ideal model. So, but if you look at the differences, for instance, you can do it yourself. It will be 400 euros a month. Okay, what are the other options? And then, this one is 100 a month. So maybe I need to think about that. So, and there's this coming up. And then some of the assets will be in the streets. And then, of course, the question is who will own the assets? And it could be a market player, for instance, for a concession for 10 or 15 years. But some of these assets, I probably think the municipality will have some role in that because of the changing of the laws right now. But still, you can have a market player, an energy manager, for instance, that helps you in creating the lowest price per month. And that's perfect combinations.
Yeah.
So there's a new market coming up, and everybody wants to, and you only need to do is say what you want and make that choice. So how easy an energy transition?
Yeah. So instead of nudging behavior, you're actually just being radically transparent, saying, pay what you weigh. You want to be active, pay less, and so on and so forth. I promise to open up. Anybody with a question for the panel? Last question, last few minutes. Yes, please. Can I use this one too? I'm not sure if I took the best pants. No, I did not. Oops. We have people listening in online. That's why I'm adamant for you to have the mic.
Okay, great. Hi, my name is Kinde. I'm one of the students too, not in spatial planning, but in urban governance. My question is more related to one of the presentations where we talked a lot about batteries as kind of a given that is part of the solution in the energy transition. But I don't feel like we talked about the ramifications it's had on the global south and that whole neo-colonial dynamic that is really explicit. And in that sense, not a transition at all, but more a continuation of what the West has been doing for the past 4 or 5 centuries. So I was wondering if we could maybe zoom into that too, to open up the conversation.
Yeah, so there are a lot of other questions that can be asked, but the way I look at it, that if you localize your energy solutions, and it's still a process how to organize it in a good way. So we're talking about local governance, but also the technology is there, but we need to find that in a different way. And if you do that in a good way, then you can create the energy everywhere. For instance, I was in Africa last year about the food, water and energy combination. And if you have food, water, energy in a local system, then you have a local economic system. And by doing so, you create not an autarkic way of looking at things, but you can create a lot of independency. And if to develop these combinations, apparently, that's what I found in Africa, is still quite new. And if you look at it from that way, we are developing knowledge that could be, so it's knowledge about how to organize your own shit. And this knowledge needs to be shared. So it's not about transferring money to the global south, it's about solving the issues and
in the here and now.
And exchange all the ideas and information on it. So, and it's about living in space, it's about all kinds of industrial processes. If you come to think of it like that, there is a lot new options available.
But I hear your question. We also work in Bospoldertussendijk, and I'm 100% sure that there's a person somewhere working in a mine extracting the raw material for the solar panels that we are putting on top. I think you're heading more in that sort of like longer tradition.
But then still, all these options I was talking about in assets locally, I was especially not talking about batteries. And if so, as a last option, you can make batteries out of salt. You can make mechanic storage. There's all kind of storage that doesn't use these rare materials from mining elsewhere. So it is about a process. That's what I mean. It's about developing the knowledge in order to be able to exchange that knowledge worldwide.
Yeah. I think we unfortunately already need to wrap up. So maybe we can sort of hint at the skills that you hope the urban curator has.
I think the best thing is for it to be someone who is actually living in that neighborhood. So empower someone, like we talked about, there's a lot of power and knowledge within a neighborhood. As soon as someone feels the agency and the competency to use that, then that's very valuable.
Yeah.
I think what would be a great leap forward is that if you, for example, the House of the Future, no, you say it in Dutch, eh? The Huis van de Toekomst. It's a good name in English. The House of the Future is actually now struggling 5 years to survive or to try to stand up. It would be a big help if within all these processes of starting up and then getting mature and then finding your role and finding your intermediate role in the neighborhood with municipalities, with the system at large, let's say. There you need a lot of help with. So how do you organize yourself? And that is something we are doing ourselves. And then, but it's very fragile. One person falls away and then your organization goes flat. And it would be wonderful if you have a sort of helping squad or whatever, or call it an institution, which can jump in and say, hey, now you need a bookkeeper, or now you need a lawyer, or now you need some advisor. Now you have to reorganize your organization. So looking at big corporations, they have an HR department that you can go on coaching courses. You can be on sick leave. So, you know, if you look at the corporate world, there's a lot of things which stand in order to build on the resilience of your organization. In this, what we're doing is very fragile. You have to go from project subsidy to this little. So it's very fragile. And there, I think, if you really want to make these strong, resilient communities, then you need something like an HR department.
Yeah.
So if that will be there.
So I think the key word is trust. The urban curator makes the interaction between the stakeholders, institutional and non-institutional. But it's not a personal trust, but an institutional trust. So the Transition-Scapes, the tools in the methodology, need to give this role, which the urban curator, I see it as a professional role, using professional tools, and by using that in a good way, you can combine the trust. So, and the professional part of the urban curator is that it's definitely not from one tender to another, from the municipality for another 3 months of payment. No, it's a 10-year program.
Yeah.
And it needs to be clear, and it needs to be there. And it needs to be institutionalized in terms of these tools, because if you don't have this methodology, you cannot learn. And it's like a Sisyphus program, and you start all over again every year.
I now want to get into, is trust neutral or not? Right? Your trust might be my distrust. But we'll talk about that over coffee.
Yes, okay.
Sorry for the cliffhanger, but I am also a trustworthy moderator, and I said we would stop at 1:45. So we have 15 minutes coffee break. For those of you new in the Institute, there's restrooms on that side, the bar is on this side, and we'll be back in about 15 minutes, and we'll delve deeper into 45 minutes or so it's not as long as the first part, into the institutional aspect of this question. But I will not let you leave without giving a heartfelt applause to Hanna Kruger, Melle Smets, and Pallas Achterberg. Ja. Je hoort mijn voice zo een beetje, ja. Nee, geen enkel probleem. Ga lekker naar binnen. I love this sound when everybody's in conversation with each other. That's where the actual work gets done. Welcome back to the second part, where we'll frame maybe a little bit more the institutional gaze and talk about the same topics, but then maybe through different lenses. I'll kick off immediately by introducing the first speaker. So the model is the same. We have a short introduction by a person knowing a lot about the field, and then we have the moderated debate again. And that person is somebody I admire a lot, and I'm not saying that because he's chief government advisor for the built and rural environment. I say that because I've been working with and following the work of research and design office entitled Bright, of which Thijs van Spaandonk is the co-founder. And he will kick off this part of the panel. Please give a very warm welcome. Dankjewel.
Thanks, Saskia. I think we're going okay, right? Yes. I was asked to tell something about the institutional change that needs to happen. I'm Chief Government Advisor for the Physical Environment for 2 months now. So I've been institutionalized. So I think I'm now entitled also to say something about it. The talk is called Community Knows What It Wants. I think it kind of follows up on the conversation that was here previously, just before the break. I'm going to run through it in like 15 minutes, hopefully, maybe quicker. So first, a quick introduction. Who am I? Well, Saskia already kind of briefly explained. I'm part of the board of government advisors for 3 days a week. I'm also, besides, one of the co-founders of Bright. We are a research and design office or R&D laboratory for the environment. But I'm also part of 5711, which is a neighborhood cooperative in Amsterdam North, where we develop community-owned real estate. So I'm trying to linking like practice to national advisory. Just quickly about the Board of Government Advisors, or CRA in Dutch, College van Rijksbouwmeester en Rijksadviseurs. So the board is the 3 of us, 3 white guys, which is also an issue, but to kind of, well, not say to make it good, but all of our bosses, so all the different ministries that are basically our clients, all the bosses there, they're all women. So they're so basically we're run by women. Anyway, so but the new state architect, which is now Francesco, his term ends like in a year, a little over a year from now. So, but obviously that needs to be a non-white person and preferably also a woman. What do? We are an independent advisory board. We advise the cabinet, but also other like national institutions on request or on our own initiative. So solicited, but also unsolicited on the urgent themes of today. So we advise different ministries, but also the national institutions that build our infrastructure. So TenneT, but also Rijkswaterstaat, so the organization that builds and maintains the highways, the bridges, the physical infrastructure, but also different government organizations. We work along these kind of 6 programmatic lines. Not going to explain all of this, but what do I want to talk about today is basically about the institutional change that needs to happen, at least that's my perspective, to make the energy transition more, well, to actually make it work, I would say. But first I want to address something about the community capacity that I think is necessary to make it work. So I'm starting off with a scheme that was drawn by Diederik Samson. Maybe Paulus knows it. It's from the... Yes, 2018. Yeah, so it's almost 10 years ago. So the climate agreement, the negotiations, we were involved as an office as kind of spatial advisors, but Diederik Samson, who was heading the climate table for the built environment, and he kind of drew up this scheme in PowerPoint, which is basically the model for how do we get all these neighborhoods in the Netherlands off the gas system. So this is how it should work. So kind of the energy transition by PowerPoint, and this was also the basis under all the negotiations that took place. What it doesn't encounter is that, or doesn't take into account is that that we have it depends a bit on the definition, but there's about 5,000 different neighborhoods in the Netherlands. Could be 6,000, depends a bit. But they all, of course, have their different characteristics, whether it's about the soil condition, the social how you can build up the building typology, the amount of networks there are, the organizational grade of the neighborhood, whether kind of social infrastructure is there or not, who owns what in those neighborhoods. All these things are basically different in every single neighborhood. So you could say, yeah, you can draw it up like this, but it doesn't work, of course. So this is kind of an image we made to kind of map the reality. So this is a map of Amsterdam, and the higher and the more dark red it gets, it's basically a stacking of different data sets. It's the amount of rental houses as part of the total housing stock in a certain neighborhood. It's also the higher the tower, the lower the income in that neighborhood is, the lower the income level, but also the lower energy label of that specific type of real estate. So the higher the point in the map, the higher the stack, the higher the issue. And this what we made it when the gas prices were soaring because of the invasion of Russia into Ukraine. So you can really identify where the house is stocking failing. People have limited financial capacity to actually do something about it, but they also don't own the real estate, so they don't have the direct ownership to do something about it. And it was a starting point for a quick research we did, and we called it Power to the People. It was part of a larger publication that was also actually edited, or I would say directed by Linda Vlasserood, which is called Nu aan de Buurt. It's up to the neighborhood. And we were looking for neighborhood capacity. So we looked, for instance, at what could be like a local heat capacity if you don't kind of immediately build like a high capacity heat network, but what are like local heat sources, and what if you add them all up? Can you kind of connect them maybe on the block scale? What could you end up? And this was like Amsterdam New West, so it was just an exercise in how much heat capacity could you kind of gather there? Or what could be the community capacity in cash and kind? So what if you kind of organize labor in a building block, for instance, and here we took the model of I think a building block in Amsterdam South, in the Rivierenbuurt, with a lot of like private ownership. But what if you we kind of figured out that if you spend if every household spends like 2 weeks in labor, then you can kind of insulate this house. And that's half of the cost of the insulation cost. So if you organize that on a block level, just by putting in some labor, you can kind of already make a huge impact there. And we also looked at kind of what kind of social infrastructure do you need in terms of like, again, the context in time was that it was the super high energy prices, so people would turn off their heating. So can you use the social infrastructure to kind of take shelter where it's warm inside, but also use the social infrastructure to kind of gather, organize, learn together on how you can take ownership of that energy transition. And kind of the model that we kind of drew up, I mean, it's a concept, but kind of like a neighborhood company where you can also kind of organize the financial streams, the capacity, like the heat capacity streams, the labor capacity, organized in such way so you can kind of make that transition happen without having to wait for the larger plan from top down to kind of be ready. Because that could take maybe 10 years from now, depending on the top-down vision. But that could be kind of the model, how it could work. But now I want to address a bit about the institutional capacity that I think is necessary. One of the recent reports that came out, I think you mentioned already earlier a report by the WRR. But this was also published, May 2025, last month, the RLI. The Council for Living Environment and Infrastructure, I guess, that's the translation, but they basically published a report, Failing and Get Up, where one of the key findings was, or one of their key conclusions was, that the government doesn't listen to communities, or doesn't involve communities into into decision-making processes, but also not in actually solving the big crisis at hand. This was the infographic was part of the report where they said like this is the recommendation, and you can see a drawn up of like government, business, market, and communities where they are the communities are one of the three parties that are necessary to actually make these big transitions happen. But I want to kind of give away like four kind of takeaways that I think could be like advices to kind of actually get there, but also the change that I think is necessary. And one is a lesson I learned from Baltimore, where I was 2 months ago, or a lesson, but I was in New York also last year, where we got shown around by a neighborhood initiative, the Bronx White neighborhood initiative, where they were buying an old ammunition depot in the Bronx to turn it into like a social housing, but also in Baltimore, South Baltimore, where they completely reorganized the local governance with a large, also democratic representation from local communities, where they also reorganized half of the budget that came from the government that was being decided on by these local bodies. But one of the key things there, especially in Baltimore, was that all the people from the local municipality in Baltimore said, like as a starting point, they said, like, community knows what it wants. So we are not going to decide for them what they should want. Community knows what it wants. So our only job is to actually listen to them and facilitate to actually make them help to get what they want. And if they can move faster than we can as an institution, then we kind of just step aside because we have other places where we also need to do stuff. So it was really a different mindset, I think, than we have as a tradition of government. The second thing I think is necessary is that we need to move towards that new playing field. So from on the left, I think that's where we are kind of now. So we have a government and we have market, and all of our instruments, all of our organizational kind of our governance models are based on that we have a government and we have market. So we have tender procedures and we have market solutions. And then we have the bystanders that are kind of the spectators of the field. That's us. So that's communities. Well, that's not communities. I mean, we are being addressed as individual citizens and consumers, not as a collective or community. And where we need to move towards to like a new playing field. I'm not sure how it works with the rules and stuff and referee and how you keep count of the scores. But what I think it should be necessary is that we become kind of part of the playing field as a organized kind of communities. But that also means that we are also kind of in charge. So we can also, at the same level as the government like does, take initiative and say, hey, government, if you want to work with us, or if you want to do something here, that's fine, work with us. We are going to do this anyway. So, but it's on our terms. And I think the communities are the only kind of is the only kind of player in that field that actually represents local values, is that basically has an integral approach, because market and government are both kind of sectorally organized, not integrally. So there's all these kind of things that are important, why this should happen. And it's also not so much different from, for instance, what Kate Rayward from the donut economy kind of proposes, where we need to make a shift from just a household and business economy towards an economy that is kind of grounded in or rooted in earth, but also has the household, the commons, the state, and the market kind of also kind of equally represented. The third kind of advice, I think, and it kind of came to me just recently when I was also part of talks about the national plan, like the national vision on spatial planning, the Nota Ruimte, where also in different meetings where the government officials were very often like, okay, but we need to talk to all these different stakeholders, and then we're going to talk to them, and we're going to talk to them, and we're going to talk to the other stakeholders, and then we kind of bring in all that knowledge, and then we're going to sit in our office and our meeting rooms and discuss kind of how all these different stakes kind of work together, and then we make a decision as government, and then we make a plan. So that's basically the left. What I think should happen is on the right, that this decision making, and that's where also I think the urban curator, but also the Transition-Scape could come in, is where we need to move towards collective decision making. Because I don't think the government has the capacity to kind of weigh and balance all these different stakes, but I also think they kind of put a burden on themselves to take the responsibility to do so, because it's way too difficult. So we need to move towards collective decision making. And then the last kind of advice I want to give, I'm also a designer, so I think it's necessary that we should understand that it's a cultural transition. So we need to also build that cultural capacity. So these are also two images I took from Baltimore. On the left, it's Regina Hammond explaining to us in the morning in East Baltimore how she kind of already lives for 40 years in that particular neighborhood. And she is being called, she's called a legacy resident. So other people call a legacy resident, legacy businesses, legacy homeowners. So they are basically, they are in charge of the cultural kind of history, the rootedness of that particular neighborhood. And on the right, it's the same legacy resident, but then in the Baltimore Museum of Art, where we were in the afternoon, we kind of ran into this painting where she and her husband were kind of depicted in an exhibition about neighborhood initiatives. So we need to find words also in Dutch, and I think we're very bad at that. So what is the Dutch word for legacy in this context? So it's not heritage, it's not inheritance, it's something else. It's a kind of a living word, I guess. And to kind of give you a quick glimpse on what are we going to do as a CRA, so as a Board of Government Advisors. We had an agenda for the last 4 years that was about, it's the last thing, which was about the 22nd century starts now. So it was about, can we look further away into the future? This is a button, a pin from, I think, the World Expo. I don't recall the year, but I think it's 50s somewhere, I guess. From Bel Geddes, who designed for General Motors kind of a model of the future city. And if you visited this exhibition in the World Expo, you got this button, like, I have seen the future. I would kind of pose another button next to it, kind of what future? But also what we have been talking about is about ownership, but also this last question, like, whose future is it anyway, as an agenda for the next 4 years? That's it. Thanks.
Oh, you have a mic there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now that I have you here,
Yeah.
I'm dying to pose two short questions, because you. The one would be about if we could speculate a little bit on institutions and how they should change. If I think about institutions, I am personally actually also quite struggling with this notion of how to debunk an institution.
Yeah.
So how to understand that, and will we have alternative institutions, or so how do you read? Let's say what future for which institution?
Good question. So now I need to put it into an advice, and the question is now, of course, to what government, since we don't really have one anymore. Not sure if it really makes a difference anyway, but well, I think it's really like a cultural question. No, I think I have one answer. So what I've seen in the last 2 months, but also previously, of course, in other kind of encounters with governments or with the government or with municipalities, is that I think all these people are working there with the best intentions, or like most of them work with the best intentions, but also the institutions are so institutionalized in the way how they organize their own decision-making processes in terms of like meetings and very much like the hierarchy within the institution. So there's very little space within these institutions to actually think freely together on like cross-level, cross-disciplinary. So I think that is a very important thing. So can you kind of break in some space, whether it's the sabbatical detour, the model that the Biennale, of course, also kind of uses, or whether it's used the Board of Government Advisors as kind of a free space to. And I think we also use it in that way to really think together, like, okay, but how should we change, and can we make more space for thinking together on the principles behind these questions, and not just kind of going to meetings, make decisions next meeting. So
Yeah.
I think that's very important. Yeah, but it means a cultural change within the organizations. Yeah.
Yeah. And another question, I was, while listening to you, really reflecting on that we are maybe fundamentally also searching for new knowledges. In the previous panel, I asked which skills should the urban curator have, which tools, with methods, and the current Venice Biennale is questioning what is intelligence and knowledge. Brings me back, I know you're also deeply engaged as an educator. How do we educate for these precarious futures and systems that are so ingrained in, as the gentleman said, 300-400 years of becoming?
Yeah. No, it's a very good question. I think that I don't think we necessarily need new knowledge or more knowledge. I think there's a lot of knowledge already there, but we just need to, well, when it comes to, for instance, like how do we work on cities, understand that the knowledge is already there. So if you go into a community like Bospollen-Tussendijk or like Amsterdam North, or I was in New West recently, involved in the market square there. The people that are there already for years, the legacy residents, you could say, they have the knowledge about their place. They also know about complex systems because, life is complex. But so it's. I think the urban curator should be very good at listening and trusting that knowledge. So I think we very often talk about trust, that community or society doesn't have a trust in the institutions anymore. I think the other way is even worse. So the institution, they don't trust citizens anymore.
Citizens. Yeah. Hooray! On that high note, Mr. Thijs van Spaanholt.
You want me here or?
You were thought to move back to the.
Sure. Yeah.
Because we have 3 people joining us. Mees van, I'm just going to call your name, and if you would then gladly please sit down, because we're pressured for time. Mees van Toren, action researcher at Klimaatwerk, an institute for public value, publieke waarden, values, excuse me. Petrus Postma, co-founder of N+, not E-Flux for the one in the cultural field. Arjen Klok, senior urban planner. But I know you as architect, designer, and doing many, many things before, but now working for the city of Amsterdam. And you win time. 1 applause for the 3, please.
Check.
Right. By means of introduction, I would also like it, and if we can keep it short so we have enough time to break open to the field. Your relation, so what you do in the day-to-day life, and particularly in relation to the energy transitions that we've been talking about. May I give you the word first?
Yeah, I started an experiment working for an institution called the Gemeente Amsterdam. Since 7 years, got a beautiful job being chief urbanist of the Haven-Stad project. And urbanist means deal and think about everything. So I'm not focused on energy. I'm focused on, let's say, all equal issues we think are relevant in the future city or the improved city or part of the city, which has one task extra, and that is provide as quick as possible, as much as possible, opportunities for people to live, work, and do other things. That makes my world slightly different than the general discussion about where to go to with themes of one or the other kind. There is pressure in my kitchen and expectations and deadlines. Yeah. So maybe that helps to understand my world, and from there on.
Thank you. We'll unpack it in a second. Mees.
Yeah. Speaking of 3 white men, by the way, back again. I'm an action researcher. I try to break through bureaucracy to speed up environmental transitions, and I do that a lot in the built environment.
And who would be your clients, or are you self-initiated?
Ministries and municipalities.
Okay. Yeah. And they come with what kind of question?
We can make it work. Can you help us?
And we can make it work is the trust or the change or the...
It can be anything. It's like municipalities stuck in their own rules, trying to figure out ways to communicate with civilians when they're insecure about how to do so.
which I always find funny because they're civilians themselves. But
They're terrified. They're terrified. Yeah.
Petrus, please.
Yes. Hi, my name is Petrus. I work at Enflux, and there I am working on all kinds of transitions in agriculture and rural areas. And in the past, I've been doing a lot on energy and feedstock transitions all over the Netherlands.
While reading your resume, I was struck by the fact that you actually transitioned from the inner city context to outer city.
Yes.
So maybe we will probably not talk so much about landscape.
Nope.
So we have 2 minutes to do so. Why did you make that transition? And is the energy transition, or how to read through the changes in the rural environment?
Well, I'm back in my old field of studies. So 2 years ago, one of my colleagues left, and I took over a project, and I thought, okay, I've been working in industry and energy now for 10 years, but the rural areas are my profession, so I'm very happy to be active there again. But what I'm learning is that in all these transitions, to make them work, there is a technique I am further developing that really gets people to move and to make decisions other than they have been doing before. And it all starts with the discussion on what values drive our choices. And the funny thing is that if you create a safe space for government officials and civilians and all kinds of professionals and market parties to have that discussion on what are the values that drive you in making a change, that you at least will get respect for each other's values. And from that respect, a joint process is born. And if you have that, and you have the guts and the freedom to place yourself a generation forward with the whole group, and think about how could society look like in 25 years, then you have a shared dialogue on what could happen and what do you think about that. And the funny thing is that you then almost always define the same challenges to address. So if you share the values and if you share the challenges you have to address, then you can define the solution space. And if you have the solution space, then you can define the measures you have to take. Yeah. And then the last step is how much of these measures, projects.
So I can actually, it's quite, it's not to be judgmental, but it's then generic in terms of the process. Doesn't matter if you're in a rural environment or in an inner city. You have to create this dialogue. Yep. I've been asked to make everything really concrete. So, Mace, what are public values or shared values?
Like you want a list of values? Is that what
you
you're
can answer
looking
it
for?
in whatever way.
I think that's for everyone to decide. I think that's kind of the whole point. I think they're the values that kind of be reduced to like individual well-being, but are more about collective well-being. I'm surprisingly unoccupied with public values for someone who works at the Institute for Public Values. I work with them, but I don't think about it too much.
Yeah. Maybe they're cliché. Maybe if I ask you the same question, is there something that we can learn? Yeah, because we're talking about abstract notions of trust, public values, but what is it?
But the funny thing is that if you talk with normal people and government officials and market parties, and you in the field of energy transition, and you talk about what are our shared values, then it will be affordability, carbon neutral, a robust system. Yeah. All the simple things, but the fact that you have the dialogue between these organizations and these representatives, that is the start of the process you need to go through. Yeah. So in rural areas, it's identity of the landscape, biodiversity, agriculture, robust water systems, and that's about it. Yeah. But it's about the dialogue.
Yeah. Arjan, you like complexity?
Yeah, very much. Yeah, thank you. Now, if I can continue on this, because for me this is a really nice day. I have tons of notes made again, and my thoughts go in every direction. But I think the public value thing in an urban context It's also in a rural context, but should start extremely with the word together. We have to deal with each other together there in a certain limited amount of space in my situation, a density which is unknownly high for the future neighborhoods of Amsterdam, and in a mix of all kinds of uses. The safe option of distributing everything in monofunctional neighborhoods is over. So, but now the grand experiment starts again, going back towards the combinations. And yeah, it's simple. We have to deal with it together, and then not only in these elements, but also through time. In the, let's say, and I always count in time. I think in time. That's what I learned 10 things in Delft. One was you have to, the difference between an architect and urbanist, you think about time, Arjan. And then 5, 10, 15, 30, 45 years. So imagine yourself together in these time frames. Mm-hmm. It's very easy to do 5 years of starting up something. But after 5 years, you're tired. So, okay, who's with us for 15 years? Yeah, then you can invest, or you can really start up something which doesn't disappear anymore. But what about 30 years? That's a lifetime. That's committing to a neighborhood or to a city or to a role. And if you first, I would say, with whatever group, talk about this for a while. What do we have together? How far do we want to go? Is the individual, and that's a kind of cynical result of emancipation, the individual seems to be more and more important compared to when I grew up, then let's say collectives, the neighborhood, the village, the elderman, or the elderly. They were just talking for the group. But if you start to define together, then probably you find other words you would like to work on together. It could be practical or ideal or very philosophical. I don't care. It's all culture and society.
Yeah, but I would say that the identity politics has made us actually not so fond of the other. The
exactly.
Togetherness.
This is the worst time to be a civil servant, of course. I made a totally different, wrong choice to become now a civil servant and not 30 years ago. So you like
complexity, so you chose for it.
Yeah, there's never a dull moment anymore. But Pallas, I was really struck by your notion that it doesn't. Don't try it even, because people don't trust institution anymore. Whether it's a company or whatever logo you put on it. Okay, shit, I thought, well, that's maybe true, and that's of course cynical, but we should continue, because the institution will not disappear, and the institution is a way of means of balancing out things and having stability in our country. It's not that bad having institutions on one or the other kind.
No, but how do you see the institution itself change? That's the question.
It's at the moment, it's like Belgium at the moment. And I also, my counter question is,
in what way?
What city are you? No, what city are you talking about? Because I'm here in my beloved Rotterdam. That's different here than in Amsterdam. Than in Amsterdam West or Amsterdam Zuidoost or North. So there are a lot of differences in the institution. The gemeente is not one total system which is 100% clear. And The Hague thinks differently about Rotterdam than about Amsterdam.
I think what Arjen is hinting at, of course, is that there's the organizational power there where we had a centralized government and so on, so that all of that is not longer in place after the decentralization in 2012. Then we had, let's say, the emancipation of the region. We are now in the reappreciation radically of the local. But I think it was, of course, hinting at the contemporary condition that our government felt today. But you want to respond to it?
Yeah, no, I'm just maybe. Is it still working?
Yes,
yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
You really don't hear it. No, because there maybe just to disagree with the people on the right, because I've heard a lot today about like the process of involving people and like the way to do it. Like in Dutch, you'd say the vorm, the shape, the way you engage. But it's not a lot about like the actual point of it. Like what do we have to offer to people? Because in a lot of these situations, I remember a quote from one civilian in Overvecht, who was like, I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. I'm going to do it in Dutch first, I'll translate. Ze noemen het participatie, maar je krijgt gewoon zo'n ding. So it was about a heat pump. And he was like, yeah, you know, it's all about participation and engagement and involvement, and they have all these like stories, and it's all great. But in the end, like the result is already determined. They've decided. It kind of just happens to you. And I think a lot of the also today, like a lot of the discussions are about the way we involve people, but it's not about the actual value we have to offer them. And I think, at least to me, I don't know how other people see that, but to me, one of the main things we have to offer is like you could own the heat company. That's kind of cool. Like, and you could be like a stock owner of the local heat company. That's a good thing to offer. It's not about like the right tables, the right dialogue, the conversations. It's about like the material redistribution that this could be.
And how does your work actually do that?
Well, we work with civilians to try and make that happen, and to like, so we're, for example, in Arnhem, we're like in between a group of civilians who want to. That's a long story, but like basically, we're in between civilians and municipalities, and try to help them work their way through bureaucracy so they can take ownership of their own neighborhood.
Yeah,
that's kind of it.
No, I mean, if I talk about architecture, one of the, let's say, cooperative housing, de Wadden in Amsterdam, these people had to go to Austria to get their mortgage because the Dutch bank system doesn't provide multiple ownership. Just to say is that these kind of questions are what I'm trying to sort of understand in order to see where then this activated citizenship, if I may call it this, or responsible co-creative process could situate itself. But you're saying people want, but you need to give them a clear point on the horizon.
Yeah, and I think we're even ourselves not always clear about the point. We just really like engagement, but we're not always clear about what we actually want to engage, like what the point of the whole thing is.
Yeah. But in my 7 years, I know the kind of Calimero thing. I think the people are way more powerful than they think. You already own the electricity company by your pension fund shit. Yeah. You can crash a bank if you don't like their mortgage rates. We did it in North Holland. You can start up projects. We have programs to start up your collective, and Rabobank nowadays gives them more. So we are proceeding. So there are all kinds of ways of, and that's what I like about the curator. Maybe that's not the word, but it's kind of coach, kind of help. To help you to step on all these really nice results of 30 years of thinking about empowerment and systems and system hacks. I should not say this here if my boss hears this, that I suggest you to hack the system in one or the other clever way. That's not correct, of course. I should listen. I'm a civil servant. I should listen to let's say, the college of aldermen and mayor who are doing the work, the politicians chosen by the people wrote down in their 4-year program. But there are all kinds of ways of work around to achieve results. And if groups don't start or don't know about each other, you cannot multiply. I was in Denmark. They have energy. To get back to the subject, they have energy cooperations already for 110 years, and they do anything they like without nobody correcting them. Yeah. Anything they like.
So these are models we could actually.
But we don't have them anymore. Yeah. We said, well, state, let's do it, or we sold it out by some liberalist ideas at a certain moment. So now we have to deal with the situation. Yeah, hack it, work around, and continue. I see leads. I'm not, let's say, stressed about the opportunities, and I would love to hear how you join my team as civil servants to continue building the new neighborhoods or improving them. My difficulty, by the way, also, Thijs, is I don't have already a lot of existing citizens in my neighborhood. So we have to be clear that the new neighborhoods versus the to-be improved existing city. There was also Paula's really good thing. The discussion totally goes different in old and new.
An existing urban fabric or something that you can actually build up. I promise to open up. If there's anybody, raise your hand. Because if not, I want to talk economy, and I want to talk, of course, I will finalize with this question of about this urban curator. What is this Jacoba of multiple trades that this person needs to bring together? We're facing a ravijnjaar. That's at least sort of to
which the energy refine or
No,
the housing
I'm
refine
sort of,
or
where I'm getting at is from this ownership. To me, it feels that a lot is resonating at the moment in terms of, well, we're literally in a system change on multiple levels. And yes, the energy is an important driver of that, but climate is, of course, a very important actor in all of this. So I'm just wondering if we should think through these transition-scapes through its. We talked about ownership already, but how far could we stretch the narrative in terms of, yeah, what the drivers are? For instance, when you talk about your climate work, what are either the narratives or the tools or methods that you bring in to even bring those further futures closer by? Sorry.
I'm not completely sure I understand the question, but
the shared values, the sharedness. Let's say, how do you? I would want to talk about different economic models through notions of institutional realities, if that makes sense. It's a large question, but
I can comment on that.
You want to jump in? Yeah.
Yeah, I see, but it's not an energy transition example. It's in the rural areas I work now. We have a huge load of political issues about nitrogen, stikstof, the water legislation, kaderrichtlijn water. And there are continuously political debates and a huge load of civic unrest on these challenges. In my specific processes I manage in the province of South Holland, I work on a daily basis with farmers and government officials, people from the water board, and we never have any discussions on these challenges. Because we don't see them as a challenge in 25 years. So we fundamentally know that the transition we are in leads to a solution where the current political debate isn't a debate anymore. And that drives people to make decisions. That drives them to make them work together. And in that sense, I think that institutions are very, very much focused on legislation and procedures from a care-driven perspective, because they are sincere and very responsible in the work. But the point is that we have made our legislation so narrow that there we have all the discussions. When you get 3 levels below on values, challenges and measures, then there is no discussion.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's the curator can create a sort of third playfield of second reality where the current problems are not the problem. And that works.
And who do you feel should adopt the urban curator? So who should? That's why I was trying to get to economy, but I maybe didn't do a good job. But we're going the economy, the societal economy is going down. We're going to, we pay for the 5% for militarization. We will have less education. There's so much going on. Like, how do we pay for tram 4? And then there's the urban curator. So who should adopt the urban curator in order for this person to connect all these values?
I can say something about it on the scale of a city. Let's say everything is a kind of, there's a bookkeeping. We discussed about it earlier also. You need, everything of value is translated into euros. So value, waarde en waarden, or waardering, that's all in one line. So in the city of Amsterdam, we, I don't know, 6 billion a year. We distribute through all the systems, and we have 20,000 colleagues. I have 20,000 colleagues. To have this city at least a little bit functioning. And we're not satisfied at all, because everything goes too slow, and the city is dirty, and so on and so on. If we make the process more into the take thinking time and more conversations, I need 20,000 more colleagues. It's fine with me. No, I think so. Let's say I'm continuously in these processes, and I'm with 6 people, I start up a process like this, and we have permanent stress and no time for ourselves or anybody else. For a normal talk, I think in quarters of an hour at the moment. Not in, let's have an afternoon talking with people, walking around in the neighborhood and so on. So you need colleagues, but at the same time, we Dutchies say to the people, well, you get everything for almost nothing, you know. And that's also an institutional thing. Everybody should follow the money. We pay our taxes, but the taxes go to The Hague. Then we have a big debate with all the communities in the Netherlands, the Vereniging Nederlandse Gemeenten. And then we get, I don't know, so many thousands for an inhabitant. For Amsterdam, so many for Eindhoven, so many for Monnikendam, and so on. And so the money flow goes like this. Amsterdam cannot just ask a tax for a proper whatever process we are doing in Amsterdam. And the same with Rotterdam and so on. Rotterdam works with half of the 20,000 civil servants. Yeah. Now, and there is something, we should talk about it, just discuss new political program, let's choose our parties, and one main topic is, shall we hire more people to spend some time on each other, to do it a little bit more properly and not in a hasty manner.
While I'm looking at you, I'm seeing the crane made by Studio Care, and I think that's a lot of work. But let's get ready for it.
How many hours did you take to have all these talks and to produce something nice like this? It's not a Friday afternoon.
This is 5 years.
Yeah, exactly. So I count in then people, hour, and so on. If I should send you a drawer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But you also don't pay the tax for it.
I'm very sorry. I also think in time, namely that the afternoon is already rounding off, and I want to hear from Mees a little bit more.
Maybe just to add on like you asked, where should the curator be? Like, who should sort of take ownership of the curator? I don't know who should take ownership, but I do think it's very easy to be critical of the institutions. I love being critical of the institutions as well.
No problem.
I enjoy.
I also did it for 30 years.
At the same time, I think there's also a lot to be improved in terms of civilians understanding the way institutions work. And like we already said, most of the people working there are great. Like they want to help people. They try their best. But there is a certain logic to the way they work, and by understanding the way they work and kind of adapting, even though it's frustrating sometimes, that helps a lot. Like, one of the ways we get things done is by showing that the financial side of it, which is often very important at municipalities, is that certain initiatives actually save money for the municipality in different ways. And if you have a convincing business case and you're like, well, you're actually going to make back this money in 1 or 2 years, it's just going to be at a different department, but we actually got them involved and they're on board as well, and you can split the savings. Great. And that's just a way of like understanding how the game is played. It's not just about listening to civilians and trying to change the institutions. It's also about making sure that civilians know how shit works, I would say.
Yeah, that's when you mentioned the quote. I was wondering if then this person, I mean, we do see, I think it was in your drawing also, we see this enormous peak of the amount of energy we consume, right? So I mean, I could talk to you for hours, but I have to finalize and I'll finish with the same question. Like, what do you feel that this urban curator needs as a skill, literally as a person? It can be multiple.
The word commitment was in my head when I heard it earlier also.
Okay.
Let's say I work in the neighborhood I also live in already for 25 years, not exactly of course, but let's say the west side of Amsterdam. And I deliberately choose to work only for let's say the Haven-Stad area or the west side of the city because I understand the city and so on and so on. I will never work for Eiburg, for example, or another project because I don't have the feel for it. And I think the curator, one or the other way, feeling it or saying it, needs commitment. And if you show that commitment, most of the time expresses itself in passion or patience and these kind of things. That would help. Professionalizing a curator is tricky.
Because?
Then before you know it, you become again a kind of system type of person who can also work for Amersfoort and for Veenendaal and thus multiplies
So it's a temporal contract for sure.
No, yeah. Well, I try to find the words. I don't have the exact job description yet, but if this would be part of the job description, besides all other competences, that would be interesting. I think.
Okay. Skill, tool, technology, methodology.
Yeah.
Urban curator.
It's a person. That's the fundamental thing. It's a person having effect on other people. Understanding that a civil servant thinks differently, acts differently, gets his reasoning from elsewhere than a civilian or any other type. So we have countless groups in society and in our government system who have learned to think about society and have grown to, it's the discourse theory. People who make decisions have a complete different reality than the civil servants who work for them. As a person, you have to understand the reasoning of these different groups in society in order to bring them together. And I think that the curator is the person that is able to read these languages and bring people together. And the Transition-Scape can be a very, very important instrument in creating a joint language. So it's about words, it's about images. And there, I think it's a very strong instrument in the end.
Mace, the skill.
I would say be both a friend and an enemy. So befriend the people in the neighborhood, befriend the civil servants, but also be able to be the enemy of those people as well. If you want to get anything done, you need to make enemies as well.
The canary in the coal mine.
Yeah, just I don't know. I feel like personally, at least all the times that we get something done, at least one person is mad. So if you want to get things done, you need to also be able to make people mad, while at the same time keeping those important connections alive as well. So it's both.
Or the devil's advocate.
At the bar.
Enemies.
At the bar. My 2 cents would be to actually not call it urban curator. I think when we talk about semantics and the language, that is already quite a... it's not... I'm not bad-mouthing anything, but I just... I don't know, way too short to honor your expertise, but please give it up for Mees van Toren, Petrus Posma and Arjen Klok. You have 10 minutes, but can you do it in 5?
Sure.
Fantastic. I promised to wrap up by the initiator, Martijn de Waal. And while he is setting up his technology, I will take the moment to... I don't know if you've seen the booklet yourself. Linda, who is the appropriate person to give the first copy to, besides yourselves? Keuzestress? Or I give it Thijs. I was going to... Fantastic. Now I'm going to give you a hand, and then we do have... Can somebody take a picture? Yes. So this is like the new deal is made. It's going higher up the ladder, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for being here, Thijs. For those of you who also want a copy, it's there. But to wrap it all up, really the last 5 minutes of this event, Mr. Martijn van der Waal.
Yeah, thank you, and I'll rush you through this because it's a bit of a recap on some of the things that I took away from this exciting afternoon. This is how we started at the empty stage, everything's still possible. And I think if I have to sort of give a brief summary of what we've talked about is, today it's about this, how do we go from models to modeling, right? I started with this notion of the model, the architectural thing that was sort of static and being there, a noun, a thing. And what we've discussed today is how do we move from that to modeling, a verb, sort of this discussion about what is this energy future, how do we get there. We discussed a lot of things, right? We started with why is it important that we talk about this, and that's because, as Paulus said, the energy transition is really an integrated challenge. It's about so many different things. We need to think about that. And then Thijs said, well, you cannot do that by PowerPoint, right? We need to do it together. So the question really is, who will steer the energy transition? again, Thijs said, okay, we need sort of come up with a new model, and then he came up with even a more complicated model. But they're still models, right? I mean, and we need modeling. So we need tools to engage communities around the transitions, and as Petra said, a safe space where we can have the conversation about what are the values that drive our choices. And of course, that's what we try to do in our project, the Transition-Scapes project, as Linda introduced, or two case studies, where we said, as Arthur said, the Transition-Scape is not just a digital product, it is the space where we can have the conversations as a tool. It's a place where we can get to a common language. What does it look like? We got some very quick impressions, like, for instance, it could show to people in organizations that the smaller initiatives are really important. For the longer ones, we try to quantify some things that cannot be quantified in order to get discussions about that. But mostly, I think one of the things we talked most about was not so much the tool, but the process in which that tool can be used. And for that, we coined the term urban curator. Who is this urban curator? And why is it important to have this urban curator? Well, as Melle said, it's really about trust. People have lost trust in the institutions. How do you start this conversation about energy? Well, we saw very many different approaches. Melle himself said, well, you know, I go into public space, I talk to people, I try to understand what's out there. And Hannah said, yeah, we try to create these conversations because we go to the community and say, well, actually, you know a lot more about the neighborhood than the government does. And people sort of acknowledge that. And the question then is, can you use some of that knowledge and the agency that's there in the organizations to empower those organizations to actually take the lead in some of those transitions? And as Arjen said, what's interesting about this urban curator, it's not just somebody who just randomly steps in. It's somebody who comes from a practice of hacking, of negotiating, right, of sort of bringing these together. So that is also a quality that the urban curator can bring in. And what we did as researchers, we brought in all of that into this really another model that I'm not going to explain to you because we have it in the little booklets that we're going to hand out today. But I think also from today, some issues or some questions revolved, and I want to close off with some of the unresolved things that I think are really interesting to discuss. It starts, of course, with this question, right? They call it participation, but in the end, you just get this thing. How do we make sure that if we start using these transition-scapes, it's not again that, right? How do we really make it interactive? Here is another tension, right? On the one hand, as Thijs said, well, the community knows what it wants and the urban curator should be really good at listening. But we also discussed that, yeah, of course we have to do that, but maybe the community is not aware of all the options that are there, right? Sort of, how do we also engage them with alternative futures that they're not already familiar with? So I think there's a bit of a tension of listening, informing, exploring together, maybe. This also came up, right? It's not just about listening to the citizens, it's also really about understanding how institutions work, right? Urban curators should really be smart about that and take advantage of that. Another thing that came up is this position of the urban curator, right? Melle mentioned, yeah, they are precarious. Can we somehow institutionalize this? Can there be a support structure? Can it maybe become a professor? Where Arjen, of course, also brought out, yeah, that could be a good idea, but there's also a risk, right? Because the urban curator can itself become an institution and become a bit detached from the local organization. So how do we solve that? Well, something to explore further. Who should host the urban curator? Should we even call it an urban curator? Another thing that came up was, of course, the notion of time. We've been following Huis van de Toekomst and Haven-Stad for a few years. And that's, of course, those are really interesting and great processes. But how do you sort of, take those processes over longer periods of time? Also, where does the role of the urban curator stop? And can the community maybe become self-supportive in a particular way? And the last one that I also found really interesting is what Paulus brought up, said, well, this is all great, but we're going to have 10,000 of these projects, and we really need to start standardizing this, right? These transition-scapes, maybe they can be actually a standardized tool that can be used in all these circumstances. But, you know, there's also this. Every neighborhood has its own very different conditions, right? So we also need to be very particularly situated. So how do we build a tool that can do those two things at the same time. So, having said that, I think we're onto something, right? I think what I found really interesting was that we really sort of, got a closer look into this role of the urban curator, the person in between the institutions and the communities organizing that, but also still a lot to explore further, which of course hopefully we will do together with you in future projects. But for now, I want to thank you all for your attention, and please take a copy of our publication in which we go a bit more into depth. Thank you.
Well, that is the nicest wrap-up ever. Thank you so much. As said, we close the event, the bar is open, and I'm really from the generation of bottom-up and top-down, but I think there's this notion of hyper-complexity in time, in relation, but I'm looking forward personally. Again, thanks for sticking with us, and let's get some oxygen in here. Thank you, Linda. Cheers.